Before we start, hit that subscribe button. It's cheaper than therapy and way more entertaining. And drop a comment after this video. Tell me if it made you laugh, question humanity, or check your ceiling for angry gods. Either way, welcome to the club of people trying to understand why fear invented religion before it invented comfort. No one ever woke up one morning in the Stone Age thinking, you know what I need today? A goat to kill for good luck? It started much simpler, and with fear. Fear was humanity's first language. It came before words, before fire, before logic. You didn't need to explain a thunderstorm, you just needed to survive it. When lightning struck a tree, you didn't think about atmospheric electricity. You thought, something up there is very, very angry. And when the first earthquake hit, the ground didn't just shake, your understanding of safety did. That's the moment the human mind met its lifelong roommate, the unknown. The unknown is terrifying because it doesn't answer back. You can scream, cry, negotiate, but silence always wins. So the earliest humans did what any creative species would do. They invented explanations, and those explanations had personalities. The wind became a spirit, the thunder became a god, the night became a living thing that watched you when you couldn't see it. It sounds poetic now, but back then it was survival. If you could name the chaos, maybe you could control it. Naming things gave the illusion of power, and we've been addicted to that illusion ever since. At first, the relationship between humans and their gods was purely emotional, awe mixed with terror. But soon, emotion demanded action. The first rituals were probably just desperate improvisations. A hunter tossing food toward the sky before a big hunt, or a tribe dancing around fire to scare away storms. It was early performance art, except the audience was invisible and the stakes were cosmic. You didn't just want your crops to grow, you wanted the universe to notice you. The idea was simple. Maybe, just maybe, the gods could be bribed. And that's when fear learned economics. If chaos could be appeased, there had to be a price. It started small, seeds, fruits, a bit of bread. But humanity, being humanity, quickly escalated. When the rains still didn't come or the disease didn't stop, the conclusion was never, maybe this doesn't work. It was always, we didn't give enough. The logic was flawless in its madness. If one apple didn't convince the gods, maybe one life would. Somewhere along the timeline of evolution, someone thought, what if the universe wants blood? And that thought stuck like gum on the soul of civilization. Blood became the ultimate currency, pure, potent, visible. It was proof that something living had paid the price. In a world where death was the most mysterious force, offering it up was the ultimate act of control. You could almost hear the reasoning echo through ancient minds. If death terrifies us, maybe we can make it work for us. It's darkly brilliant, turning your greatest fear into your greatest offering. Sacrifice wasn't just about gods. It was about calming the unbearable anxiety of being alive. It was humanity's first attempt at therapy, except the therapist was invisible and kept asking for more goats. Think about it. Early humans had no science, no medicine, no meteorology. When their child got sick, they didn't have antibiotics. They had guilt. If something went wrong, someone must have angered the divine. And if that was true, then maybe taking responsibility could restore balance. But since no one wanted to die for everyone else's mistakes, they found substitutes. The weak, the animal, the unlucky. Anyone who could carry the weight of communal fear. Thus, the idea of the scapegoat was born. It wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was psychology wearing feathers and paint. That's the hidden truth behind those ancient rituals. They weren't just about death, they were about order. Chaos made people feel small, helpless, meaningless. Sacrifice gave structure to the madness. It created a narrative, a reason for the suffering, a way to act instead of simply endure. If you could offer something, you weren't powerless anymore. You were participating in the grand conversation between humanity and the cosmos. It didn't matter that the cosmos never replied. The ritual itself was the answer. What's fascinating and darkly funny is how consistent we've been ever since. Thousands of years later, the details changed, but the instinct didn't. We may not slaughter lambs on altars anymore, but we still make sacrifices to forces we barely understand. We sacrifice our time to careers that devour it, our sanity to ideals that never thank us, our peace to the opinions of strangers on screens. The altar just got modernized. The knife went digital, but the blood, metaphorical now, still flows. We're still bargaining with invisible powers, hoping our offerings buy us safety, love, or relevance. And that's the cruel genius of the human condition. We can't stop negotiating with fear. Fear built temples before it built civilizations. It taught us prayer before it taught us politics. It created both gods and guilt. Even now, somewhere in the subconscious, the same ancient voice whispers, give something up, and maybe the chaos will spare you. We laugh at old myths, but deep down we're still the same nervous species, staring at the storm and hoping we've paid enough to survive it. Because maybe the real reason people started making sacrifices wasn't to honor gods, but to feel less afraid of themselves. The first altar wasn't carved in stone. It was built inside the human mind, out of fear, wonder, and the desperate hope that life would mean something if someone, anyone, was watching. It's funny how quickly fear turns into math. Somewhere in the ancient mind, people started doing spiritual accounting. If we give this, maybe we'll get that. It was divine calculus, long before numbers had names. Offerings became transactions, and the gods, real or imagined, turned into cosmic merchants. It wasn't just religion, it was customer service for the soul. You brought your prayers, your livestock, maybe even your neighbor's goat if times were tough, and you hoped the universe accepted your return policy. Because if something bad happened after you gave your best sheep, that meant your credit was bad with the divine. And nobody wanted bad credit with the gods. There's something painfully relatable about that logic. We like to think we've evolved beyond primitive superstition, but we still do the same thing, just with different symbols. We don't pour wine on altars. We pour hours into jobs we hate. We don't slaughter animals to prove our loyalty. We sacrifice weekends, friendships, and sometimes our sanity, hoping life will pay us back with happiness or status. The ancient world had temples. We have deadlines. They prayed for rain. We pray for Wi-Fi. Different rituals, same anxiety. Please, let this offering be enough. The idea of sacrifice is brilliant if you think about it. Not morally, but psychologically. It gave humans the illusion of control in a world that refused to be controlled. Storms, famine, death, none of it could be predicted or prevented, but sacrifice offered a way to say, we did our part. It turned chaos into a partnership. The ritual itself became a coping mechanism, a way to feel less helpless in a universe that didn't offer explanations. And humans, more than anything, crave meaning. If there's meaning, there's purpose, and if there's purpose, the suffering hurts a little less. So the fire pits stayed hot, the altars stayed red. And every time a tribe tossed something into the flames, they felt safer, if only for a while. The smoke rose, the fear quieted, and the silence after the ritual felt like approval. It's easy to see how addictive that feeling became. Because what happens after the ritual? The rain comes, the crops grow, the war ends, and the mind connects the dots, even if the dots were never connected. That's the dangerous part of being human. We'd rather believe in correlation than chaos. It's more comforting to think the sacrifice worked than to admit we have no idea why the storm stopped. Over time, the ritual stopped being about results and started being about order. The world was unpredictable, but the ceremony was predictable. You knew the steps, the chants, the smell of smoke, the sound of drums. Rituals became a script for surviving uncertainty. And soon the priests arrived, the first middle managers of spirituality. They were the ones who claimed to know the fine print of divine contracts. You want good harvests? That'll be 2 doves and a lamb. It's easy to judge now, but let's be honest, we still have our own priests. They're just dressed in suits instead of robes, promising salvation through productivity or financial success. In every age, fear finds someone to translate it. The language changes, but the story doesn't. In ancient Greece, it was sacrifices to Zeus. In Mesoamerica, blood for the sun. Entire civilizations were built around keeping the heavens satisfied. Some believed the sunrise itself depended on their offerings. Imagine waking up every morning thinking, if we don't burn something today, the sun might not come back. That's devotion, or paranoia. But to them it was love. A desperate, transactional love between mortals and the divine. They weren't trying to be cruel. They were trying to survive in a universe that didn't explain itself. What's fascinating is how quickly the act of giving turned into the act of taking. Once you believe the gods demand sacrifice, it's easy to justify anything. The same fear that started as humility turned into hierarchy. The powerful realized that controlling the ritual meant controlling the people. If you decide what the gods want, you decide who lives and who dies. That's how faith becomes politics, and how politics becomes sacred. Sacrifice wasn't just spiritual currency anymore, it was social control. The blood didn't just flow upward to heaven, it flowed sideways through power. But even then, even under manipulation, the core emotion stayed the same. Fear dressed up as devotion. Every empire, every tribe, every kingdom had the same prayer hiding behind its rituals. Please don't let the world end. It's the most human plea there is. And maybe that's why sacrifice has never really disappeared. It just evolved. We still live in fear of invisible consequences, still look for scapegoats to carry our guilt. We've traded the knife for shame, the altar for expectation, but the instinct is the same. And here's the strangest part. Sacrifice didn't just build religion, it built morality. The willingness to give something up for something greater shaped our entire concept of virtue. To sacrifice became synonymous with goodness. To suffer became noble. Somewhere along the line, humanity decided that love must hurt to be real, that suffering was proof of sincerity. We forgot that the gods never asked for that. We did. We invented pain as a language for meaning. It's almost tragic and a little bit funny how universal that story became. Across every culture, people stood over altars, terrified but hopeful, believing that the world demanded payment for peace. And maybe that's why we still get anxious when life feels too good. Some ancient part of the brain whispers, "Careful, you haven't paid the price yet." Oh yes, we still expect balance, still believe in cosmic accounting, that happiness is suspicious unless we've suffered for it. It's the ghost of sacrifice haunting the modern mind. And if that's true, then maybe understanding sacrifice isn't just about history. Maybe it's about seeing how deeply fear and meaning are intertwined inside us. We can laugh at the rituals of the past, the blood, the chants, the absurd bargains, but we're still performing them, just on a different stage. We still want to believe that life can be negotiated, that chaos has a customer service department, and the cruel, wonderful truth is that maybe it does, but the only offering it ever wanted was our awareness. It's strange how the first civilizations were obsessed with order. Not comfort, not happiness, just the feeling that something, anything was under control. The world was too unpredictable to be trusted, so people built patterns. They built temples where the gods could live, altars where fear could rest, and rituals where chaos could be neatly folded into choreography. If life was a storm, the sacrifice was an umbrella. Flimsy, yes, but better than standing in the rain naked. That's what sacrifice was at its heart, a desperate attempt to organize the terror of being alive. But rituals are a bit like bureaucracy. They start simple and end up eating their own purpose. What began as a plea to nature turned into theater. The offering became a performance, and the performance became a rule. People stopped asking why they were doing it and started asking how exactly they should do it. What time, what animal, what color of robe. And somewhere between the chants and the smoke, meaning got lost under protocol. Fear had found its favorite disguise, tradition. No one questioned the logic anymore. They just followed the script. Because if you do the ritual wrong, maybe the sun won't rise. And no one wants to be the one responsible for that kind of bad Yelp review from the gods. There's an uncomfortable truth about humans. We'd rather be wrong together than uncertain alone. It's safer to belong to collective fear than to face the silence of not knowing. That's how societies became synchronized, through ritual. The entire community could gather, scream, cry, and offer something up together. It was unity through terror, solidarity through trembling. And honestly, it worked. It gave people a sense of belonging. When everyone fears the same thing, no one feels insane. It's the same instinct that makes us obsess over the same headlines today, or collectively panic about the same crises. Ancient or modern, fear is still the best marketing strategy. As civilization grew, so did its creativity in feeding the gods. Animals were good, but humans? Humans were premium-grade currency. You didn't just offer something alive, you offered consciousness. The most expensive item in existence. It sounds barbaric now, but in a way, it made perfect sense to them. If the gods made humans in their image, then only a human life could truly satisfy them. The logic was terrifying but consistent. If we are the most valuable thing we know, then giving that up must surely impress whatever created us. It's horrifying, but also deeply human. We always assume the divine shares our appetite for drama. The Aztecs, for example, believed that the sun itself depended on sacrifice, that if blood didn't spill, the universe would stop running. Every sunrise was a receipt of payment. And while it's easy to dismiss that as madness, think about the underlying psychology. They genuinely believed their actions mattered to the cosmos. That's a kind of hope disguised as horror. Imagine believing your life, your ritual, your effort actually keeps the stars burning. That's the same impulse that drives modern people to overwork, overthink, and overcommit. The idea that if we stop moving, everything collapses. Some people sacrifice hearts on stone altars, others sacrifice sleep on spreadsheets. The mechanism hasn't changed, only the tools. And as these ceremonies grew, they became social glue. They weren't just spiritual, they were political. The priest wasn't just a holy man, he was a CEO of cosmic affairs. His job was to interpret divine invoices and ensure payments were made on time. Religion, at that point, became the world's first bureaucracy of fear. You couldn't just deal with the gods directly anymore. You needed representation. And that representation came with fees, favors, and power. If the crops failed, the priest didn't just say bad luck. He said, you didn't sacrifice enough. The logic was elegant in its cruelty. The gods never failed, only humans did. Fear became law, rituals became policy, and blood became currency. But with every sacrifice, a paradox grew. If giving up life pleased the gods, wouldn't giving up more life please them more? That's how devotion turned into competition. Neighboring tribes tried to out-sacrifice each other as if heaven had a scoreboard. It's almost comical, the divine equivalent of who brings the better gift to the party. And just like modern social media, comparison became its own ritual. They gave 2 bulls, we'll give 10. Ancient civilization was one giant cosmic contest for attention. The gods must have been exhausted. But beneath all that spectacle was a haunting emotional truth. Sacrifice wasn't only about pleasing deities, it was about cleansing guilt. The act of giving something away, something precious, painful, offered relief. Guilt has always been one of the most unbearable emotions, and the human mind will do anything to offload it. Sacrifice became the original therapy session, with blood as the receipt of absolution. It was an emotional economy where suffering equaled sincerity. You didn't just say sorry, you proved it with pain. And that logic still infects us today. We don't believe we deserve peace unless we've suffered for it. If you look closely, sacrifice is everywhere in modern life. Not just in religion, but in the way we think about success, love, and worth. We still measure devotion by how much it hurts. We still romanticize exhaustion as dedication. We still believe pain earns meaning. That's the hidden inheritance of every ancient ritual. The altars are gone, but the psychology remains. We no longer fear the gods above. We fear the expectations around us, and the result is the same. Someone or something always bleeds for balance to be restored. And maybe that's the cruel beauty of humanity, our ability to turn fear into meaning, even when the meaning hurts us. The same instinct that once built temples still builds corporations, churches, and cults of self-improvement. We crave a sense that our suffering matters, that it leads somewhere, that the chaos has a pattern. And perhaps it does. Not because the gods demand it, but because we can't bear a world where they don't. The sacrifice in the end isn't for them, it's for us. A desperate offering to silence the question that has haunted humanity since the first drop of blood hit the ground. What if nothing is listening? It's strange how something as terrifying as sacrifice became, over time, a form of comfort. People didn't just fear it, they relied on it. The act of killing something sacred, spilling blood on the earth, became a ritual that promised balance. There was a grim reassurance in knowing that the gods had been fed, the debt had been paid, and chaos was, at least for a moment, contained. It's the same relief you feel after paying your taxes. You don't actually understand where the money goes, but it buys you peace of mind. The difference is that in ancient times, the tax was your neighbor's goat, or in particularly bad years, your neighbor. The psychology of it is almost elegant. By creating a system where every misfortune could be traced to an unpaid spiritual debt, people regained a sense of agency. The storm didn't just happen. Someone must have angered the gods. The disease wasn't random. Someone failed to make an offering. The entire universe became moral bookkeeping. The chaos of life could finally be explained in familiar terms. Cause, effect, punishment, redemption. It's tragic, yes, but also deeply human. The idea that everything happens for a reason may sound comforting now, but it was born from the same soil as the sacrificial altar. The priests, of course, became the accountants of this cosmic economy. Their job wasn't just to interpret divine will, it was to translate it into procedure. They were the original customer service for existence itself. Oh, your crops failed? I see you offered 2 pigeons instead of 3. That's not going to cover it. And while it's easy to laugh at the absurdity of that, we still follow the same logic. We still believe that if we do the right things, say the right words, and follow the right routines, life will reward us. It's ritual disguised as routine. The gym, the diet, the mindfulness app, each one promises transformation if only you remain devout. And just like the ancients, when the ritual fails, we blame ourselves, not the system. But here's where it gets even darker. The act of sacrifice didn't just calm fear, it fueled power. When you can convince a population that suffering keeps the universe in order, you control everything. Leaders learned that fear was more efficient than swords. Religion and rule became indistinguishable. The king wasn't just a man anymore, he was the chosen translator of divine appetite. Obedience wasn't submission, it was survival. That's how entire civilizations came to see pain as holy and hierarchy as destiny. And the most brilliant part? It didn't even feel like oppression. It felt like devotion. Somewhere along the line, humanity learned that blood had value. Not just literal blood, but the willingness to lose something precious. Pain became a form of currency, and power loved it. Every empire that rose found a way to turn sacrifice into spectacle. The Romans did it in arenas, calling it entertainment. The Aztecs did it on pyramids, calling it faith. The medieval church did it through guilt, calling it salvation. The packaging changed, but the message was the same. If it hurts, it must be meaningful. And the more it hurts, the closer you must be to the divine. It's a terrible logic, and one that still echoes in how we romanticize suffering today. We like to think we've evolved, but listen closely to our language. We sacrifice our time, our dreams, our sanity for love, work, or ambition. We bleed for success. We kill ourselves to achieve goals. The metaphors give us away. We've traded literal blood for symbolic blood, but the altar's still there. We just built it inside our daily lives. The modern world doesn't demand animal sacrifices. It demands your attention, your energy, your constant availability. The gods have new names now. They're called productivity, reputation, perfection, and they're just as insatiable. But it's not all despair. There's something almost comedic about how predictable we are. We claim to worship logic, science, progress, yet we still light candles when something scares us, still knock on wood when we're nervous, still whisper prayers before boarding a plane. We're rational until turbulence hits. The ancient mind isn't gone, it's just better dressed. The same fear that made cavemen toss bones into fire makes us double-check if we sent that risky text. Deep down, we're all negotiating with unseen forces, hoping to avoid metaphorical lightning strikes. And maybe that's why sacrifice never truly disappeared. It just got quieter. Instead of offering others, we offer ourselves. We burn out to prove we care. We apologize for resting. We wear exhaustion like a badge of honor, as if the universe is more impressed by our suffering than our joy. But the truth is, the gods we fear now are man-made. Algorithms, expectations, and visible systems that reward endless giving and punish stillness. We've turned ourselves into both priest and victim, managing rituals no one remembers inventing. Yet even within this absurdity, there's a strange beauty. The willingness to sacrifice at its core is also the willingness to love, to give something up for something greater, even if that greater is misunderstood, shows the depth of human devotion. We are, in essence, creatures who long to belong to something beyond ourselves. That longing built temples and skyscrapers, shrines and cities. The tragedy is not that we sacrifice, it's that we forgot to ask why. If you peel back every ritual, every tradition, every act of devotion, what you find underneath is the same trembling question that's been echoing for millennia. Will this make me safe? It's a question that has built civilizations and destroyed them, inspired art and justified cruelty. And it's still alive, just quieter now, hiding in the way we chase approval, validation, and certainty. Every sacrifice, ancient or modern, is just one more attempt to answer it. And maybe, if we listen closely enough to that question instead of trying to silence it, we'll finally realize that safety was never something the gods could give us. It was something we were meant to build within ourselves. There's something hauntingly beautiful about the moment right before a sacrifice, and that quiet suspension in the air when everyone believes they're about to make the world right again. The crowd holds its breath, the priest raises his hands, and for a second everything feels aligned. It's order, pretending to be peace. That's the paradox of sacrifice. It makes people feel in control while reminding them how powerless they really are. Every ritual, no matter how grand, was just a way of whispering into the void, "Please don't hurt us." And maybe that's the cruel genius of the human mind. We can't live with chaos, so we choreograph it. We turn fear into rhythm, blood into meaning, death into a performance. It's the ultimate coping mechanism. When you can't stop something, ritualize it. We do it with grief, with heartbreak, even with failure. The modern world calls it closure. The ancients called it appeasing the gods. Either way, it's the same fragile human trick, trying to make pain make sense, but the more sacrifices people made, the hungrier the gods seemed to get. The universe doesn't actually have a customer support line, but if it did, the hold music would be the sound of humans offering more than they can afford. When the rain didn't come, they gave more. When the disease didn't stop, they found someone new to blame. That's how the idea of the scapegoat evolved. Not just an unlucky soul, but a moral technology, someone to carry the burden so everyone else could sleep. It was efficiency through cruelty, and it worked, at least emotionally. The moment you blame someone else, your fear feels manageable again. The most dangerous part? People started finding comfort in the pattern. If disaster followed neglect, then suffering had logic. And if suffering had logic, then maybe it wasn't meaningless. That thought is intoxicating. It's the root of every religion, every superstition, every self-help book that promises to explain why bad things happen. We're not addicted to answers. We're addicted to structure. Even if it's wrong, it feels safer than randomness. The mind would rather believe in angry gods than admit the rain doesn't care. Eventually, sacrifice became spectacle. Rituals stopped being about survival and started being about identity. The bigger the offering, the stronger the faith. Or at least that's what people told themselves. Imagine standing in a temple, watching a bull being slaughtered while 1,000 people cheer, not because they're cruel, but because they genuinely believe it keeps the universe spinning. It's grotesque and poetic at the same time. A crowd of fragile beings celebrating their own attempt to tame the infinite. And when the blood dried and the smoke rose, they felt cleaner. That's the emotional genius of ritual. It provides catharsis. You don't need results. You just need the feeling that you did something. It's like yelling into a storm. The storm doesn't care, but you feel better for shouting. The act itself becomes the therapy. And that's why sacrifice persisted for millennia. Because it worked psychologically, not cosmically. It soothed the mind, even if it didn't change the weather. What's fascinating is how that logic still shapes our behavior today. We might not kill goats anymore, but we still practice micro-sacrifices for peace of mind. We fast for health, donate for karma, apologize for things we didn't do just to keep harmony. Our altars have changed shape. They're made of calendars, inboxes, and mirrors. We still offer things up. Only now we call it self-improvement. We sacrifice sleep for success, authenticity for approval, peace for productivity. Somewhere, deep in the brain, the same ancient equation hums quietly. Give up something you love, and maybe life will love you back. And isn't that the cruelest joke? That after thousands of years of evolution, we still think suffering is the price of safety. It's in our stories, our religions, our movies. The hero must lose something to gain wisdom. The lover must endure heartbreak to find true connection. The artist must suffer to create meaning. We treat pain like it's sacred. as if joy is unearned unless it hurts first. It's poetic, yes, but also a little absurd. Maybe the gods aren't demanding it anymore. Maybe we just can't stop demanding it of ourselves. There's a strange comfort in that continuity. It means that somewhere inside us, the same ancient fire still burns, the need to turn fear into form, chaos into art, pain into purpose. Maybe that's the real inheritance of sacrifice. It taught us how to find meaning in loss, how to transform what terrifies us into something beautiful. The price was high, too high, but it gave us language, ritual, and the first idea of responsibility. It made us creators, even as it made us killers. And maybe that's what the ancients were really trying to do, without realizing it. They weren't just feeding gods, they were feeding understanding. Every ritual, every drop of blood, every whispered prayer was an early experiment in control, an attempt to connect cause and effect in a world that refused to explain itself. In that sense, sacrifice was humanity's first science. A brutal, emotional, deeply flawed science, but science nonetheless. It was an early hypothesis about how the universe might work. If I do this, maybe that will happen. The only difference between the priest and the scientist is that one used fire while the other uses formulas. And so, in a strange way, sacrifice built the foundation of reason. It gave humans their first sense of power, even if it was imaginary. It turned terror into action and action into meaning. And though we've outgrown the rituals, the psychology remains the same. We still need to believe our actions matter, that our efforts ripple outward into something larger. The altar is gone, but the impulse endures. Every time we strive, give, or endure, we are repeating the same ancient prayer, the same desperate hope whispered into the dark. Please, let this mean something. It's ironic how the earliest people believed the gods demanded sacrifices, when in truth, it was probably the humans demanding explanations. That's what sacrifice really was, an answer to a question no one knew how to ask. Why do children die? Why does the earth shake? Why does the sun burn us one day and abandon us the next? The ritual gave structure to the chaos. It gave people a way to feel like they were participating in their own survival, even if the universe wasn't taking attendance. You could call it faith, but it was also strategy, cosmic customer loyalty. But something strange happened over time. The offering stopped being about the gods and started being about us. The act of giving became its own form of power. You didn't just fear divine wrath. You began to admire your own devotion. Sacrifice became status. The more you gave, the more righteous you seemed. That's when religion stopped being about survival and became about performance. The altar wasn't just a place of worship. It was a stage. People weren't just praying anymore. They were auditioning for moral superiority. You see shades of that even today. The modern ritual of out-suffering each other. Who works more? Who sleeps less? Who sacrifices the most for the cause? Ancient priests had incense. We have burnout. And it's funny in a dark way because the moment the ritual turned public, fear turned into theater. The same act that was once about humility became a competition for divine attention. In ancient Greece, entire cities would try to outdo each other with festivals of blood and wine just to prove they were more devoted. Imagine being a god and watching that. It must have felt like judging a very dramatic talent show. 10 out of 10 for enthusiasm, -1 for accuracy. But that's the human condition in a nutshell. We'll turn anything into a spectacle if it means meaning. Even the idea of substitution, the notion that one death could redeem many, carried a deep psychological brilliance. It externalized guilt. Instead of each person drowning in their own sense of failure, they poured it all into one vessel and destroyed it. That's not just theology, that's emotional engineering. The ritual killed not just the victim, but the unbearable feeling of responsibility. You could walk away clean because something else had taken your place. It was collective therapy with higher stakes and worse lighting, but that illusion didn't last. The more people sacrificed, the more they began to notice that fear didn't really go away. It just reset. The gods never stayed satisfied for long. The rains still failed, the crops still died, the wars still came. And with every disappointment, humanity's relationship with the divine started to feel like a toxic marriage. Lots of effort, no emotional payoff. Yet breaking up wasn't an option because the alternative, a world without meaning, was even more terrifying. So we doubled down, inventing more rituals, more rules, more reasons, to believe the fault was ours. That's when guilt evolved from a feeling into an institution. You didn't need a thunderstorm to feel divine anger anymore. You carried it in your chest. Every mistake became a tiny altar inside the mind. You could repent privately, bleed emotionally, and call it virtue. The gods had officially outsourced their work to human psychology. And that's where we still live, most of us, worshiping quietly at the altar of our own guilt. You don't need a priest to tell you you're not enough. You do it better yourself. But maybe guilt isn't entirely bad. After all, it's the same force that keeps us from chaos. It makes us reflect, adjust, and empathize. The problem is when guilt stops being a compass and becomes a prison. Ancient people tried to bargain with their guilt by offering sacrifice. We try to bargain with ours by offering apologies, achievements, or self-denial. It's the same trade under different lighting. We still whisper to the same invisible judge, "See, I'm trying." And there's humor in that too, the fact that after all this time, we still act like life is keeping score. We treat existence like a cosmic vending machine. Insert suffering, receive meaning. But meaning doesn't work that way. It isn't something you buy with pain. It's something you build through awareness. Yet that realization is terrifying because it means no one else is coming to save you. No God, no ritual, no scapegoat. Just you and your choices. And that level of freedom? That's scarier than any lightning bolt. Maybe that's why we cling so tightly to ritual, even when it hurts us. There's comfort in repetition, even when it makes no sense. The familiar act, lighting the candle, reciting the words, following the routine, keeps the abyss at bay. It's not about the gods anymore, it's about rhythm. The universe might not respond, but at least we know what to do next. In that way, ritual becomes its own kind of mercy. It keeps us from unraveling completely, and maybe that's the point. Maybe the real lesson of sacrifice isn't about blood or fear or forgiveness, but about endurance, the ability to face the incomprehensible and keep moving anyway. Every ancient offering, every chant, every act of giving up something dear was, in a way, a declaration of hope, a stubborn refusal to surrender to meaninglessness. Even when the gods were silent, humanity kept speaking. And maybe that's the most sacred thing we've ever done, to keep creating rituals, stories, and reasons in a world that offers none. Because in the end, that's what keeps the fire burning, not belief, but the beautiful, absurd persistence of trying to make sense of the dark. The deeper you look into sacrifice, the more it starts to resemble a mirror rather than a ritual. What humanity offered to its gods wasn't just blood or fire. It was a reflection of its own fears, ambitions, and desires. The altar was never really about heaven. It was about the human condition laid bare in smoke and sound. When ancient people slit the throat of an animal, they were reenacting their own vulnerability. They were saying to the universe, "We know life takes life. Please, just don't take ours today." It was both confession and negotiation, a deal made in trembling faith and existential panic. And yet, somehow, out of all that fear came art. The earliest music, poetry, and theater were born from ritual. People danced not for entertainment, but for survival. The drum beat wasn't a performance. It was a heartbeat for the cosmos. Every movement, every chant, every painted wall in a cave was a way of asking the same unanswerable question. Are you listening? You could call it religion, but it was also the beginning of creativity. The line between a prayer and a song was blurry, and maybe that's the secret. Maybe the first artists were just frightened people trying to turn terror into beauty. That's something modern humans rarely admit. Fear has always been the greatest motivator for meaning. We build cathedrals, launch rockets, write novels, all because we're terrified of disappearing without a trace. Sacrifice was simply the earliest form of that impulse. To offer something precious was to declare, "I exist, and this matters." It was a defiance against the void. And isn't that what every act of creation still is? We don't light fires to please gods anymore, but we light up screens for the same reason, to prove we're still here. There's a strange poetry in how the logic of sacrifice shaped our ethics too. The act of giving something up became the foundation for empathy. Once people understood the value of pain, their own and others, morality began to form. If it hurts me, it probably hurts you. In that sense, the altar was humanity's first lesson in compassion. It's ironic, isn't it, that the same act that once justified cruelty eventually inspired kindness. Through the ritual of destruction, people learned the worth of preservation. Sacrifice, in its paradoxical way, taught us to care. But of course, humans being humans, we took that lesson and ran it straight into absurdity. We started competing over who could suffer more for virtue. Saints, martyrs, ascetics, the heroes of faith became those who endured the most. Entire religions built moral hierarchies out of misery. The more pain you could withstand, the purer you must be. Somewhere, the original meaning, connection, humility, awe, got lost in translation. We replaced understanding with endurance. It's like someone took the manual for spiritual growth and highlighted only the chapters about suffering. And we still do it. We glorify struggle as proof of worth. No pain, no gain. That's not just gym talk. It's theology disguised as motivation. We admire those who sacrifice sleep, relationships, and peace for success, as if exhaustion itself were a virtue. It's the same psychology as the ancient priest, the belief that something must die for something else to live. Only now, the gods were feeding our productivity and ego. The altar is a desk, and the blood is time. What's hilarious, if you think about it, is that the modern world has made sacrifice more efficient, but not less frequent. We've automated it. You don't need to kill anything. Just subscribe, schedule, and surrender your attention. The ritual is invisible, but the cost is the same. Your energy, your silence, your presence. You give it away piece by piece, thinking it's voluntary. And yet, when the day ends, you still feel the same ancient exhaustion. that quiet sense of having given too much to something that didn't love you back. Still, there's a strange dignity in the act of giving, even when it's misplaced. Because behind every sacrifice, whether it's a lamb or a late-night email, there's the same longing to belong to something bigger, to be seen, to make it matter. Maybe that's why we keep repeating the pattern. We can't help but believe that meaning is earned through offering. Even when logic tells us it's absurd, our souls whisper, but what if it's true? And so we keep giving time, love, effort, as if the universe is still watching. Perhaps the real tragedy isn't that sacrifice existed, but that we never learned how to stop once it stopped serving us. We forgot how to give without bleeding. We turned generosity into obligation, devotion into exhaustion. Somewhere along the way, the sacred became transactional again. The gods we feared vanished, but the habits they left behind still govern us. We still feel guilty for resting, proud of suffering, and terrified of wanting too much. And yet, deep beneath all that conditioning, there's something profoundly human in our instinct to offer. It's what makes us capable of love, of art, of change. When you strip away the superstition and the fear, sacrifice becomes something else, a symbol of transformation. To give something up willingly, without demand or expectation, is no longer fear-driven. It's freedom. It's the realization that meaning doesn't come from loss, but from choice. Maybe that's what the ancients were really trying to discover all along. Not how to please the gods, but how to survive themselves. The altar was never about feeding the divine. It was about starving despair. Because when you give meaning to pain, it stops devouring you. It becomes story. And in that story, humanity finally found its voice, trembling, defiant, hopeful. The same voice that still whispers through every act of creation, every act of love, every quiet moment when we decide to give, not because we must, but because something inside us still believes the world is worth offering something to. There's something darkly comic about how humanity keeps reinventing sacrifice, as if we're addicted to the idea that something must always be lost for something else to be gained. We've built skyscrapers, invented artificial intelligence, mapped the human genome, and yet we still cling to the same old emotional algebra. If it costs me, it must be worth it. Maybe that's our real superstition, not belief in gods, but belief in struggle. The ancient farmer gave his best lamb to the fire. The modern worker gives his best years to the clock. Different altars, same offering. It's strange because we no longer believe the universe demands anything from us, and yet we still live as though it's keeping score. We apologize for resting, feel guilty for pleasure, and treat joy like something we have to earn through misery. You can see it everywhere, in the way people brag about how little they sleep, how busy they are, how long it's been since they took a day off. It's as if exhaustion has replaced faith, and burnout has become the new badge of moral virtue. The gods used to ask for blood. Now they just want your Wi-Fi password and your peace of mind. But perhaps the most unsettling part is how invisible modern sacrifice has become. The ancients had their rituals, their fires, chants, and altars. You could see the cost, smell it, hear it. Now it's silent. You give away your time one click at a time, your focus in endless scrolls, your authenticity in carefully edited versions of yourself. We've replaced the priest with the algorithm, an invisible judge that rewards your devotion with digital validation. The irony is painful. We've finally created gods that actually respond instantly to worship, and they still leave us empty. It's funny to imagine what an ancient priest would think of us now. He'd look at a person staring at their phone for hours, sweating under fluorescent light, whispering, "Please, just one more notification." And he'd probably say, "Ah, yes, devotion, very pure." Because at the end of the day, the pattern is identical. The offering has simply changed form. Instead of lambs, we burn our attention. Instead of temples, we have timelines. Instead of fearing wrath, we fear irrelevance. And in both worlds, the same emotion fuels it all, the fear of being forgotten. Maybe that's what every sacrifice was really about, the terror of disappearing. Ancient people feared that if they didn't give enough, the gods would forget them. Now we fear the algorithm will. It's a kind of immortality bargain. If I stay visible, maybe I'll matter. But immortality through exhaustion isn't transcendence. It's just a longer version of the same suffering. It's humanity still trying to negotiate with oblivion, still lighting candles in digital temples, still whispering, "Don't erase me." And yet, buried beneath all this absurdity, there's something almost noble in it. The impulse to give, even when misguided, comes from the most human place imaginable, the desire to connect. We don't sacrifice because we love pain. We sacrifice because we love meaning. It's the same instinct that made a mother in a tribal village offer her last grain of wheat to a god she couldn't see. It's the same feeling that makes someone today work through the night to provide for a family they adore. The act itself, stripped of fear, is sacred. It's just that somewhere along the way, we forgot how to separate offering from obligation. There's also a strange wisdom hiding inside the old rituals. Sacrifice, at its core, was about transformation, turning something tangible into something transcendent. The burnt offering became smoke, the physical became spiritual, It was humanity's first metaphor for change, long before philosophy or psychology existed. Maybe that's why those rituals still haunt us. They represent the idea that loss can lead to renewal. Every breakup, every death, every goodbye is just a modern reenactment of that same lesson. Something must end for something else to begin. But not every ending needs to hurt. That's the evolution we haven't quite learned yet. We still cling to the notion that transformation requires suffering, that the only way to grow is to bleed. The truth is, growth happens in stillness too, in laughter and curiosity and play. The ancients might not have had the luxury to see that, but we do. We can choose our rituals now. We can decide that meaning doesn't have to cost us everything. It's a revolutionary thought. That joy can be sacred too. And yet, we resist it. There's a stubborn part of the human psyche that doesn't trust happiness unless it's paid for. It's why people sabotage themselves when life gets too good. Why we wait for the other shoe to drop. Somewhere in our ancestral coding, pleasure still feels like theft. We inherited millennia of guilt and we wear it like a family heirloom. But maybe it's time to trade that inheritance for something else. To stop proving our worth through suffering and start proving it through presence. Because maybe the real meaning of sacrifice was never about giving something up, but giving something to life, to love, to awareness, to the possibility that existence itself might be worth celebrating, not just surviving. The ancients stood around fires offering pieces of themselves to the unknown. We stand around screens doing the same. But maybe the next stage of evolution is to stop feeding the flames of fear and start feeding the spark of wonder instead. And perhaps that's the quiet secret hidden beneath thousands of years of ritual and blood, that the gods were never waiting for the offerings. They were waiting for us to notice that the act of giving was the point all along. The real altar was always the human heart, and the most divine thing we could ever offer wasn't suffering. It was awareness, the understanding that we don't need to bargain with existence to belong to it. We already do. And once that truth sinks in, maybe we'll finally stop trying to please the heavens and start living like we're part of them. It's fascinating how every civilization thought their gods were unique. Thunder gods, sun gods, harvest gods. And yet, when you peel away the names and myths, they were all bargaining with the same emotion. Fear. Fear was the universal language. Every temple, every ritual, every sacrifice was just humanity writing love letters to its own terror, hoping it would write back. It's almost endearing. The idea that we thought if we were loud enough, devoted enough, the universe would finally say, "Fine, I'll behave." It never did, of course, but we kept trying anyway. Maybe because doing something, even something terrifying, always feels better than doing nothing at all. And maybe that's the real secret of why sacrifice lasted so long. It gave people a script for chaos. When the world fell apart, they knew their lines. Offer the food, spill the wine, kneel and hope. It wasn't about the outcome. It was about the illusion of rhythm. You could survive almost anything as long as it felt like part of a pattern. That's the genius of ritual. It gives chaos choreography. Even pain becomes bearable when it has steps you recognize. Maybe that's why, when things go wrong in modern life, we still look for ritual too. We light candles, we scroll endlessly, we whisper affirmations like modern incantations. We don't call it sacrifice anymore, but it still smells like one. The human mind doesn't really care about truth as much as it cares about coherence. It's not asking, is this real? It's asking, does this make sense? That's why the logic of sacrifice, as brutal as it was, made people feel safe. There was always a reason for disaster, even if the reason was terrifying. A bad harvest wasn't random, it was punishment. Disease wasn't meaningless, it was a lesson. The gods didn't hate you. They just needed a little more blood in the bowl. It's a grim kind of comfort, but it beats chaos. Because chaos, real chaos, has no rules, no explanations, no refunds. And humans will do anything to avoid staring into that kind of silence. If you look at it that way, sacrifice was the first philosophy, a primitive attempt to explain suffering. It was humanity's first theory of everything, not a scientific one, but an emotional one. You didn't need data, just belief. And belief was the most renewable resource on Earth. You could harvest it generation after generation, pass it down like a family heirloom. Even now, our modern myths follow the same pattern. We still want to believe that suffering means something. If we work hard enough, sacrifice enough, love enough, the universe will reward us. And when it doesn't, we call it a lesson. Some people call that resilience. I call it emotional recycling. It's also hilarious how humanity, in trying to please invisible powers, accidentally learned how to control visible ones. The rituals that were meant to appease gods ended up creating agriculture, calendars, and social order. The same people who sacrificed animals to predict the seasons were basically doing early meteorology, just with more blood. It's messy progress, but progress nonetheless. You could say sacrifice built civilization by mistake. People started meeting regularly to worship, which required organization, leadership, and record keeping. From there came hierarchy, bureaucracy, and paperwork. And honestly, between paperwork and human sacrifice, I'm not sure which is worse. But the truly brilliant part was how people began to see their own power through ritual. If an offering could bring rain, maybe humans weren't entirely powerless after all. Maybe the divine wasn't a distant force, but something you could negotiate with. That shift from helplessness to participation changed everything. It made people invent politics, morality, even art. Sacrifice was the first time humans stood up to the void and said, let's make a deal. And isn't that what we still do every day? We negotiate with fate, with time, with each other, offering little pieces of ourselves in exchange for some illusion of control. Of course, once humans tasted that power, we got addicted. Sacrifice became not just a ritual, but a currency. The more you gave, the more holy you looked. And, conveniently, the more authority the priests gained. It's the oldest business model in the world. Manufacture fear, then sell relief. Even today, entire industries thrive on that same formula. The products are just less bloody and more expensive. You don't buy forgiveness with doves anymore. You buy it with subscriptions, retreats, and detox teas. The idea hasn't aged a day. It's easy to laugh at ancient rituals and the smoke, the chants, the blood. But the truth is, those people were doing what we still do now, trying to make life bearable. Every time you throw a coin into a fountain or whisper please before opening an email, you're reenacting a miniature sacrifice. You're offering a piece of your hope to something bigger than you. It's both tragic and beautiful, because it means that even in our most rational moments, we're still poets of fear, still trying to bargain with mystery. And maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe the instinct to offer, to give meaning through giving something away, is what makes us human. Because at its best, sacrifice isn't about losing. It's about transforming. The act of letting go creates space for something new. The ancient fire that once consumed flesh now fuels creativity, compassion, reinvention. Every artist knows this. Every parent, every person who's ever fallen in love and realized that love always costs something, time, ego, certainty, and yet gives back more than it takes. So perhaps the real evolution of sacrifice isn't that we stop doing it, but that we learn to redirect it. Instead of feeding fear, we can feed connection. Instead of appeasing gods, we can offer our awareness to life itself. Because maybe the lesson hidden in all those altars and ashes is simple. It was never about what we gave up, but about what we learned to value. The fire was never meant to destroy. It was meant to illuminate. And once we understand that, we realize that the ritual never truly ended. We've just been trying across centuries to remember what the offering was for in the first place. The strange thing about sacrifice is that it began as an act of fear and somehow evolved into an act of meaning. The earliest humans looked at the sky and thought, something up there wants something from us. Thousands of years later, we look at our calendars and think, something out there still wants something from us. The gods changed names, the rituals changed form, but the offering never stopped. We still wake up every day and give parts of ourselves to things we can't quite define. Time, reputation, approval, ambition. It's almost funny how the instinct never died. It just got better dressed. And maybe that's because sacrifice at its core is the most honest reflection of the human condition. It admits what we rarely say out loud, that to live is to lose. Every choice is a trade. Every moment of joy borrows against something else. Sleep, peace, the illusion of control. The ancients understood this long before philosophers wrote it down. Their mistake wasn't believing in gods. It was assuming the gods were external. The real altar was always inside, and we've been feeding it unconsciously ever since. There's a strange comfort in that idea, that maybe the people burning offerings weren't so different from us, just less subtle. When they wanted safety, they gave up their livestock. When we want security, we give up spontaneity. They poured wine into the soil. We pour our energy into screens. It's all the same gesture, trying to buy certainty from a world that doesn't sell it. And every now and then we realize the price keeps going up. What's fascinating is how sacrifice shaped the very architecture of society. Once people accepted that something precious must always be offered, the concept spilled out of temples into every corner of life. Marriage became a sacrifice of independence. Leadership became a sacrifice of peace. Parenthood, well, that's a lifelong sacrifice of sleep and sanity, disguised as unconditional love. Even the idea of justice was built on this exchange. One life for another, one punishment for one crime. Sacrifice became the blueprint for morality itself. Without it, right and wrong might never have had a stage to perform on. But like all things born of fear, it eventually mutated. What started as devotion turned into debt. People began to believe that existence itself was something owed. You were born already in arrears, already guilty, already owing the universe an explanation for your own breathing. Religions institutionalized it, governments capitalized on it, and somewhere along the way, humanity internalized it. We began apologizing for simply existing, a quiet, invisible ritual that still shapes the way we move through life. You can see it in the way people hesitate to take up space, to rest, to say no, as if every act of self-preservation were an act of defiance against invisible gods still demanding payment. The irony is that the more advanced we became, the more abstract our sacrifices got. The ancients had blood, we have burnout. They offered the body, we offer the mind. We sacrifice silence to noise, attention to distraction, connection to performance. We tell ourselves it's progress, but sometimes it feels like the gods just got smarter. They learned that taking our time is more efficient than taking our lives. And yet, there's still beauty buried in all of it. The act of sacrifice, at least when chosen freely, is what allows love, art, and purpose to exist. To create anything meaningful, you must give something up. The painter sacrifices comfort. The parent sacrifices freedom. The lover sacrifices ego. The act of offering, when done consciously, becomes sacred again. It's no longer fear-driven, it's intentional. It's no longer a plea for mercy, it's an affirmation of worth. Maybe that's what the ancient rituals were trying to teach in their own dramatic, blood-stained way. That giving meaning to loss is what keeps us human. Of course, humans being humans, we turned even that into performance art. Somewhere along the timeline, self-sacrifice became branding. We started confusing martyrdom with virtue. Look how much I've given up became a form of moral currency. You see it in workplaces, families, even friendships. People competing over who suffers most gracefully. It's absurd, but also deeply revealing. We're so used to equating pain with goodness that we don't know what to do with happiness when it arrives. We start looking for the catch, the cosmic fine print. Surely, we think, joy must cost something too. Maybe that's the final ghost of sacrifice. The inability to believe in free gifts. Even when life offers us something beautiful, we instinctively reach for the bill. We expect consequences for every pleasure, punishment for every peace. And so, we keep giving away pieces of ourselves, even when no one's asking. It's tragic, but it's also kind of darkly funny. The gods retired centuries ago, and we're still sending them checks. But perhaps that's why understanding the roots of sacrifice matters. Not to condemn it, but to reclaim it. To remember that the act of giving doesn't have to come from fear. That surrender can be strength, and offering can be joy. Imagine if we learned to give not to survive, but to express. Not to earn forgiveness, but to participate in creation itself. That's the evolution the ancients never reached. The moment when humanity realizes the fire on the altar was never hungry for flesh, only for awareness. Maybe that's the hidden ending to this long story. That every burnt offering, every spilled drop of blood, every whispered prayer was just a prelude to a single understanding. That life doesn't demand sacrifice, it is the sacrifice. Every heartbeat, every choice, every breath is an exchange. Not with gods, but with time itself. And when you finally see it that way, the fear dissolves. You stop asking what must be given and start asking what's worth giving to. Because in the end, that's the only offering that ever mattered. The one you make with your eyes open to a universe that never asked for blood, only for presence. It's strange how humanity never stopped believing that the universe keeps receipts. Somewhere deep inside, we still imagine a cosmic accountant tallying up what we've given, what we've lost, and what we might still owe. That's why we feel uneasy when life gets too easy. It feels like a clerical error. Surely, we think, someone up there forgot to charge me for this happiness. It's funny how guilt has become the modern proof of morality. If we're not suffering, we start to suspect we're doing life wrong. That instinct has roots older than language itself. Early humans didn't understand randomness, so they invented cause and consequence where none existed. If the crops failed, it was because someone didn't pray hard enough. If lightning struck the hut, maybe someone looked at the wrong star. It sounds absurd now, but we still live by the same logic, just dressed up in productivity quotes and wellness routines. We say things like, you make your own luck, and everything happens for a reason, as if we're still trying to control the weather with motivational slogans. It's not faith anymore, it's anxiety with better branding. But there's a strange genius to that logic. It gave humans a sense of agency. If the gods could be appeased, then chaos wasn't all-powerful. Sacrifice gave structure to uncertainty. It was a contract with the unknown, signed in fear but written in hope. And maybe that's the most beautiful contradiction in human history, that all our trembling, blood-soaked rituals were ultimately just acts of optimism. We believed that life, for all its cruelty, could be reasoned with, that somewhere behind the thunder and the plague there was a negotiable force that might listen if we tried hard enough. It was naive, sure, but it was also the first step toward meaning. And yet, over centuries, that optimism curdled into something darker. What began as a hopeful offering became a test of obedience. The gods, once cosmic partners in survival, turned into auditors of morality. Fear replaced dialogue. Sacrifice turned into submission. It's easy to laugh at ancient myths now, at the image of trembling priests throwing things into fire. But think about it. Have we really changed? We still burn pieces of ourselves to fit into systems we barely understand. The fires are metaphorical now, but they're no less hungry. We offer our authenticity to social approval, our rest to ambition, our truth to comfort. And each time we do, we call it balance. That's the irony. Modern sacrifice hides under the language of progress. We tell ourselves we're evolving, but the rituals just got more discreet. The altar moved from the temple to the mind. The priest became the voice in our head whispering, "You should be doing more." The blood is invisible now. It's in our stress, our insomnia, our quiet sense of depletion. The system doesn't demand public offerings anymore. It just wants private exhaustion. And the cruel part is, we volunteer for it. Yet, there's something almost comedic about how predictable we are. Every era thinks it's smarter than the last, and every era invents new ways to worship the same fears. The Egyptians feared the sun might not rise. We fear the Wi-Fi might go out. Different apocalypse, same panic. If ancient people built pyramids to please their gods, we build personal brands to please algorithms. Both require endless maintenance, both promise immortality, and both leave us wondering why the gods never seem satisfied. But here's where it gets interesting. Every civilization that relied on sacrifice eventually hit a wall. People started asking uncomfortable questions. What if the gods don't actually want blood? What if we've been projecting our own hunger onto the sky? And that's when humanity began to turn inward. Sacrifice stopped being about giving up something to the divine and started being about giving up something within ourselves. Ego, pride, selfishness. The battlefield shifted from the altar to the soul, and for the first time, we began to realize that maybe the entire drama of sacrifice wasn't cosmic at all. It was psychological. That realization was revolutionary. It turned ritual into reflection. The fire that once consumed offerings became a metaphor for inner transformation. You didn't need a priest anymore. You needed awareness. The gods didn't need to be fed. They needed to be understood. It was the moment spirituality began evolving into philosophy, and fear began dissolving into insight. The altar, in a way, became a mirror. Humanity was no longer killing to survive. It was learning to observe itself. But of course, that kind of enlightenment is exhausting, and most people prefer shortcuts. So we reinvented guilt again. Cleaner, subtler, more self-sustaining. We built entire cultures around self-improvement, where the sacrifice never ends because perfection always stays out of reach. Now, instead of sacrificing animals, we sacrifice our peace in the name of potential. We call it hustle, discipline, or success, but it's the same old ritual in a sharper suit. You can almost hear the ancient priests applauding from history. Finally, they learned to sacrifice themselves without supervision. Oh, us. And yet, even in the absurdity of it all, there's something profoundly human about our persistence. The instinct to offer, to give meaning to effort and loss, isn't foolish. It's courageous. It's what keeps us building, hoping, creating. Maybe the problem was never the act of sacrifice itself, but the motivation behind it. When you give out of fear, it drains you. When you give out of love, it expands you. The same fire that once destroyed can illuminate if only we stop worshiping the smoke. That's the strange redemption arc of sacrifice, that after thousands of years of misunderstanding, it might still hold the key to freedom. The lesson isn't to stop giving, but to start choosing what's worth giving to realize that the universe was never keeping receipts in the first place. And maybe that's the real comedy of human existence, that we've spent millennia trying to appease gods who never asked for anything, when all along, the offering they wanted was the one thing we keep forgetting to give, ourselves, fully awake, fully present, and no longer afraid to live without owing anyone for it. It's almost poetic how humans can turn anything, fear, confusion, even guilt, into a system. When the first person decided to offer something to the unseen, it wasn't just desperation, it was organization. They turned chaos into choreography. You take the goat, I'll light the fire, and maybe the sky won't kill us today. It was practical magic, the kind that built civilizations. And honestly, part of its genius was how it made suffering feel productive. If you were going to lose something, at least now it had purpose. There's a kind of comfort in that logic. Pain hurts less when you can file it under meaning. But that comfort had a price. Because once people realized they could negotiate with the unknown, they also realized someone had to manage the negotiations. Enter the priests, the intermediaries, the self-appointed customer service agents of eternity. They claimed they could interpret divine invoices and recommend suitable payments. Too much rain, maybe 3 goats, drought, better make it 7. It sounds absurd, but you can't deny it worked. It gave structure to fear. Even better, it created the world's first subscription plan. Pay regularly, and maybe nothing terrible happens. The ancient gods would have loved direct debit. And yet, behind all the rituals and burnt offerings, there was something profound happening. People were learning that giving something up could transform their inner world. Sacrifice became not just a plea for safety, but a rehearsal for letting go. When you offered your best grain or your favorite animal, you weren't just trying to please the gods, you were practicing detachment. You were telling yourself that you could survive loss, that maybe what defined you wasn't what you owned, but what you were willing to release. It was a primitive form of therapy, wrapped in smoke and superstition. Of course, humans being humans, we couldn't leave it at that. We industrialized spirituality. The more elaborate the sacrifice, the more holy it seemed. Temples became economies. Blood became currency. And somewhere in the middle of it all, the simple idea of offering as renewal got buried under mountains of ritual debt. You can almost picture a Sumerian priest sighing in exhaustion after the 10th goat of the day, thinking, there has to be a better way to manage divine-customer relations. But every system, no matter how sacred, eventually outgrows its own story. As civilizations evolved, people began noticing cracks in the logic. The same farmers who sacrificed their harvest to the gods started wondering why the priests' granaries never went empty. Philosophers started asking whether the gods were really that hungry, or if humans were just projecting their own appetites onto the heavens. The deeper thinkers realized something radical. The gods didn't crave flesh, they craved awareness. Maybe the sacrifice wasn't supposed to be for them, but about us. Maybe it was never the blood that mattered. It was the courage to confront the fear behind the blade. That shift changed everything. Suddenly, the altar wasn't just a place of death. It was a stage for transformation. When you burned an offering, you weren't destroying it. You were turning it into something invisible, something symbolic. Smoke became a bridge between worlds, and people began to understand that meaning lives in what can't be measured. That's the paradox. The more humans tried to feed their gods, the more they starved for understanding. Eventually, someone had to ask the question that shattered millennia of tradition. What if the gods were never separate from us at all? That idea spread like wildfire. Dangerous, liberating, heretical. If the divine wasn't outside, but inside, then maybe the whole system of sacrifice had been a mirror from the beginning. Every offering was a reflection of the human desire to cleanse, to renew, to transform. You didn't need to kill a lamb to prove devotion. You needed to face your own shadows. You didn't need to spill blood. You needed to shed illusion. Suddenly, sacrifice wasn't about punishment, it was about awakening. And that realization terrified the powerful, because once people understood that they could connect to the sacred without permission, the entire hierarchy wobbled. You can almost hear the panic echoing through marble temples. Wait, so you're telling me people could talk to the gods directly, without us? Humanity had invented its first middlemen, and now they were at risk of obsolescence. But like any system, religion adapted. It reinvented sacrifice as morality. Instead of physical offerings, people were taught to sacrifice desire, joy, individuality. The altar moved inside the mind again, but this time it came with guilt. Because guilt, unlike blood, never runs out. It's the perfect renewable resource. And still, beneath all the layers of doctrine and control, the essence of sacrifice kept glowing like a hidden ember. Every time someone let go of pride to make peace, every time someone forgave instead of retaliated, the ancient ritual flickered back to life. Sacrifice wasn't gone. It had just evolved into empathy. The same impulse that made humans slit a goat's throat under the moonlight is what makes a parent stay up all night beside a sick child. It's what makes an artist give years to a single idea. The form changed. The fire stayed. It's strange to think about, but maybe that's what the whole ritual was trying to teach us all along. That surrender is not weakness, it's transformation. The ancients wrapped that truth in myth because myth was the only language big enough to hold it. Today, we try to explain it with psychology and philosophy, but it's the same story. What you give away defines what you become. The real sacrifice is never about loss. It's about evolution. And if there's something quietly comic in all this, it's that after thousands of years of trying to appease the heavens, humanity might finally realize that the only God who ever demanded sacrifice was the one we invented inside ourselves. The God of control, of fear, of what if. Maybe all this time, the universe has been sitting back, arms crossed, watching us panic and whispering, you could have just relaxed. But then again, maybe the chaos was necessary. Maybe the long road of offerings, guilt, and devotion was the only way for us to learn that the sacred doesn't live in fire or blood, it lives in awareness. And that's the one offering we still struggle to give. It's almost ironic that humanity's oldest attempts to reach the divine often began with blood, and yet what we were really trying to do was feel clean. The logic is darkly beautiful in its simplicity. Something must die so something else can live. The crops fail, the rain doesn't come, the child gets sick. And someone says, maybe the gods are angry. So we offer life itself as an apology, hoping the universe can be guilt-tripped into compassion. It's a bold move, really, trying to bribe the cosmos with its own creation. But in that desperate gesture lies one of the most revealing truths about the human condition. We have always mistaken control for safety. What people feared most wasn't death, it was meaninglessness. Death could be managed, ritualized, explained, but chaos? That was unacceptable. The ritual of sacrifice was our first moral contract with the unknown. It turned terror into transaction. If you do this, maybe that won't happen. If you spill enough blood, maybe the sky will forgive you. It sounds barbaric now, but at least it gave people a sense of agency. And really, who among us doesn't still do the same thing in subtler ways? We promise the universe will be better if things go our way. We call it manifestation now, but it's just guilt dressed in glitter. Ancient priests understood this better than anyone. They saw that sacrifice wasn't just about feeding the gods, it was about feeding the psyche. Watching something die, something you loved, something you owned, created a powerful illusion of participation in cosmic order. It made life feel negotiable. And if you've ever argued with your Wi-Fi router like it's a living god who can be reasoned with, you know that instinct never really died. Humans hate feeling helpless, so we invent elaborate ways to pretend we're not. Sacrifice was simply the first version of click here to agree to the terms of existence. But there's a subtle twist in this story. The earliest sacrifices weren't all grim and bloody. Many were symbolic. Offerings of fruit, grain, song, dance, all meant to remind the gods that humans were still trying. Those moments of celebration suggest something deeper. Maybe sacrifice wasn't just about loss, but about gratitude. The act said, we recognize that everything we have could vanish tomorrow. Or it's that awareness, that trembling humility, became the foundation of spirituality. It wasn't about punishment, it was about perspective. And perhaps the tragedy of history is that, somewhere along the way, we forgot the joy that once lived inside the offering. Then came the great innovation, substitution. Someone realized you didn't need to kill yourself to make peace with the divine. You could just delegate. Enter the era of proxies. One animal could stand in for an entire tribe's guilt. Later, one man could stand in for humanity's sin. The idea was revolutionary, compassion disguised as convenience, but it also introduced a dangerous logic. If someone else could die for your mistakes, maybe you didn't need to change. Responsibility outsourced, accountability diluted. It's like hiring a personal trainer and expecting them to get fit for you. That substitution principle seeped into everything. Politics, religion, even relationships. We started expecting others to pay for our peace. The scapegoat became an archetype, not a person, a symbol of humanity's refusal to confront its own reflection. Every culture found a way to blame someone for its suffering. It was easier than facing the truth. The monster was always inside the mirror, and that's perhaps the cruelest joke of all, that sacrifice, meant to purify us, became the mechanism by which we avoided purification. Still, the act carried power. There's something undeniably magnetic about surrendering what you love most. It creates meaning through absence, beauty through destruction. The ancient Mayans believed that blood contained chulel, the sacred essence of life. To spill it was to open a door between worlds. They saw sacrifice not as loss, but as conversation. Each drop of blood whispered across the veil. We are still here. We still remember. It's haunting, and yet, in its own way, hopeful. The Greeks, too, elevated sacrifice to art. Their tragedies were full of heroes who gave their lives not just for gods, but for ideals. Iphigenia, sacrificed by her father to ensure fair winds to Troy, became a symbol of the eternal tension between duty and love. We may not burn daughters anymore, at least not literally, but the story still plays out in boardrooms and living rooms every day. How many parents trade their presence for security? How many people bury joy to feed ambition? The altars just changed shape, and somewhere in the middle of all this, a quiet shift began. The philosophers arrived, suspicious of all the smoke and drama. They asked, what if sacrifice was never about the gods at all? What if it's about us learning to let go? That question cracked the foundation of every temple. Because if that were true, then maybe the gods didn't need the offerings. We did. Maybe what we were really trying to feed was meaning itself. And that realization, once it took root, began to erode the power of ritual blood. Humanity started inching toward something profound. The idea that transformation doesn't require destruction. Yet, even as the flames of the old altars dimmed, the instinct persisted. We still crave the catharsis that only sacrifice provides. That's why we romanticize it. The artist who suffers for their vision, the lover who gives everything, the soldier who lays down their life. Sacrifice remains our favorite proof of sincerity. It tells us that something mattered enough to hurt. And maybe that's why, no matter how civilized we pretend to be, we still whisper the same old prayer beneath our modern chaos. Let my loss mean something. There's something heartbreakingly funny about it, too. Thousands of years of evolution, and we still can't resist believing that pain buys purpose. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But it's the story we keep telling ourselves, generation after generation, that some kind of offering is required for order to exist. Maybe the universe isn't asking for our blood anymore, but it still asks for awareness, patience, empathy. And perhaps, in the end, those are the hardest things to give. Because unlike goats, or gold, or even time, they can't be replaced. They have to come from within. And that's where sacrifice returns to its quiet truth. That it was never about losing something to please the divine, but about realizing what within us is worth surrendering for something greater. Not to gods, not to fear, but to life itself. Because the act of giving up, when it's conscious, chosen, and full of love, doesn't empty us. It reveals us. There's something unsettling about realizing that, for most of human history, blood was the first language spoken to the gods. Not poetry, not prayer. Blood? It was the currency of sincerity, the proof that you meant what you said. And honestly, it makes a strange kind of sense. When words failed, blood spoke louder. You couldn't fake sacrifice. You couldn't sweet-talk the divine. You had to give something that hurt. Maybe that's why even today, when people say, put some skin in the game, we nod as if that makes sense. It's the ancient echo of an old truth, but nothing real ever comes free. But here's the part we often forget. The people performing these rituals didn't think they were being cruel. They thought they were keeping the world in balance. In their minds, every drop of blood kept the stars in motion. Every offering kept the seasons turning. Imagine living in a time when thunder could ruin your crops and you didn't know what electricity was. You'd make a few wild guesses too. If killing a chicken made the lightning stop, you'd probably start pricing chickens by the thunderstorm. It was a crude kind of science, cause and effect written in fear. And that's exactly what sacrifice was. The first experiment. Humanity's first hypothesis that the universe might respond to intention. If I do this, maybe something changes. It was the birth of causality, wrapped in ritual. You could say the first scientist was the first priest holding a knife over a fire. Both believed the same thing. That action could shape outcome. The only difference is that one wrote formulas and the other wrote prayers. The instinct was identical, to make the invisible obey. What's funny is that we never really outgrew that logic. We just swapped the goat for a calendar. We sacrificed sleep to productivity, peace to ambition, authenticity to approval. The altar became our daily routine. And we still cling to the same promise that if we just give enough, work enough, suffer enough, something greater will reward us. We call it hustle culture, but it's really just religion with better branding. And we don't burn incense anymore. We burn out. That connection between pain and meaning runs so deep that we get suspicious when something comes easily. If life offers us a moment of joy without struggle, we immediately start waiting for the catch. It's as if our brains still believe in a cosmic accountant who doesn't allow free gifts. That's why guilt is the modern version of sacrifice. We can't light fires to appease the gods anymore, so we light ourselves up instead with anxiety, self-doubt, and overthinking. We've turned penance into personality, and somehow we're proud of it. But here's the strange beauty buried in all this. Even the bloodiest rituals were never really about death. They were about renewal. The ancient mind understood something we've forgotten, that endings feed beginnings. When a tribe offered an animal, they believed its life force didn't vanish, it transformed. Energy, spirit, essence, whatever word they used, went somewhere. That idea survives today in physics more than religion. Energy can't be destroyed, only changed. Maybe that's why sacrifice felt sacred. It wasn't just destruction, it was transformation you could watch happen in real time. In many cultures, sacrifice became theater. The Aztecs performed their rituals atop massive pyramids, not hidden away but before crowds, blood cascading down stone steps as sunlight hit the knives. To us, it looks horrific, but to them, it was transcendence. The act itself told a story that life was fragile, cyclical, precious. The priest wasn't just killing, he was narrating. Every motion was choreography. Every scream was symbolism. The audience wasn't horrified. They were reminded. That's the disturbing genius of ritual. It turned terror into spectacle, fear into art. And yet, somewhere in that spectacle lived something strangely modern. The need to make meaning visible. Humans are visual creatures. We believe what we can see. And sacrifice made the invisible tangible. You couldn't watch the gods change the weather, but you could watch the offering burn. You couldn't see forgiveness, but you could see the smoke rising. Maybe that's why modern life feels so spiritually thin. The rituals are invisible now. We apologize silently, hope privately, scroll endlessly. Our sacrifices have no witnesses, and so they don't feel sacred anymore. But if you look closer, you'll notice the instinct is still there, just hiding in plain sight. When someone deletes all their social media to start fresh, that's a digital purification ritual. When people shave their heads after a breakup, that's symbolic death and rebirth. When you burn an old photo or throw away a letter, you're performing a private offering to the gods of closure. It's all the same story, just with different props. We keep reinventing sacrifice because it's the only language we've ever had for change. Maybe that's the secret behind why humanity clings to the concept so stubbornly. Sacrifice is the bridge between who we are and who we want to become. It's not about loss, it's about metamorphosis. You give something up, not because the universe demands it, but because your old self can't carry it anymore. The ancient rituals externalize that truth. We've internalized it. We call it letting go, moving on, evolving. Same process, different soundtrack. And there's something darkly funny about that. How we spent thousands of years sacrificing to gods only to realize we were just rehearsing for therapy. Maybe that's what all those fires and altars were preparing us for. The moment humanity would finally look inward and understand that every offering was just a way of saying, I'm ready to change. Because no matter how modern we become, no matter how rational we claim to be, the same truth still burns beneath it all. Something must be released for something new to begin. It's almost poetic, really. The ancients gave blood, we give time. They built temples, we build identities. They feared gods, we fear failure. Different rituals, same craving, to make peace with the chaos of being alive. Maybe the gods were never the audience. Maybe they were the metaphor, a mirror we used until we could finally face ourselves. And when that realization hits, the smoke clears, the fire fades, and what remains isn't fear or guilt. It's awe. The quiet, almost comic realization that all this time, the only thing the universe ever wanted was for us to stop trying to bargain and simply be. There's something deeply ironic about the fact that sacrifice began as humanity's attempt to control fate, and ended up teaching us that we control almost nothing at all. Picture this. An ancient villager stands in the dust, holding a trembling animal, under a sky that could flood or burn without warning. They raise a knife not just out of fear, but out of hope, that maybe, just maybe, the gods will notice the effort and go easy on them this season. It's a heartbreaking kind of optimism. And it's funny, in a tragic way, that thousands of years later, we're still doing the same thing, just with less livestock and more credit cards. We don't slaughter goats anymore. We sacrifice weekends, hobbies, and mental health to the gods of productivity. The tools have changed, but the ritual remains. That's the secret power of sacrifice. It never dies. It just evolves. The ancient fire became the office lamp, the altar became the desk, and the chants turned into emails sent at midnight. It's almost poetic how seamlessly we replaced fear of divine wrath with fear of irrelevance. The priest used to say, "The gods are watching." Now your boss says, "The metrics are down." The tone is different, but the anxiety feels exactly the same. We keep feeding something larger than ourselves, and we never quite know if it's satisfied. Maybe the only real difference between a temple and a corporation is air conditioning, and yet the instinct to offer remains strangely noble. Beneath the exhaustion and confusion, there's still that same human impulse to give meaning to our struggle. And when people say things like, "It'll all be worth it someday," that's modern sacrifice distilled to a sentence. We tell ourselves stories of future redemption so we can endure the present. The problem is that, unlike the old gods, the modern ones never grant closure. You can pray to success for years and still never feel forgiven. The altar just keeps demanding more. Another project, another achievement, another version of yourself that's never quite enough. It's almost comical how we try to rationalize this endless offering. "I'm doing it for my family," we say. "I'm doing it to prove something to myself." And maybe that's true. But sometimes it's just fear wearing a respectable disguise. Fear of being forgotten, fear of not mattering. The ancients feared droughts. We fear insignificance. Same fire, same smoke, just different costumes. And if you pay attention, you'll notice something. Sacrifice always comes from the same question whispered in different accents. Will the universe notice me if I give enough? But what if the universe was never keeping score? What if the gods were always silent, not because they were cruel, but because they were waiting for us to stop outsourcing our worth? That's the quiet revelation hiding inside every ritual. The ancient priests may have used blood and flame, but what they were really enacting was a metaphor for transformation, a symbolic shedding of what no longer served them. The tragedy is that most of us still go through the motions without realizing that the fire was always meant to burn within, not around us. And that realization changes everything. Once you see sacrifice as internal alchemy rather than external payment, even the smallest acts take on new meaning. Giving up bitterness becomes a sacred ritual. Letting go of control becomes a ceremony of trust. Forgiving someone becomes the modern equivalent of offering a lamb to the divine, except this time no one has to die. The act remains the same, turning pain into purpose, chaos into clarity. The real miracle isn't divine intervention, it's emotional evolution. Still, it's easy to romanticize that transformation and forget how messy it really is. Real sacrifice doesn't come wrapped in poetic metaphors. It looks like uncomfortable choices, awkward silences, and sitting with truths you'd rather avoid. The ancients had the decency to make their rituals dramatic. Ours happen quietly, behind screens or smiles. You won't see the blood, but you'll feel the ache, the little sting of letting go of a dream, an identity, a person, and maybe that's progress. We've learned to bleed emotionally instead of physically. The gods must be proud of our efficiency, but somewhere in that process, there's also humor. Because no matter how enlightened we think we are, we still perform tiny superstitions every day, as if afraid to jinx our luck. Knock on wood, don't step on cracks, charge your crystals, refresh your email. We've replaced the sacred with the absurd, but the impulse is the same. If I just do this right, maybe life will go smoothly. The universe must look down, shake its head, and say, they still think there's a manual. What's fascinating is that the very thing that once terrified us, the randomness of existence, is what makes life worth living. The ancients built rituals to tame it, but what if the point was never to control it, only to participate in it? That's what real sacrifice teaches us in the end. Not how to manipulate the unknown, but how to dance with it. Every time we release something, a belief, a fear, an attachment, we make space for wonder. And wonder, in its quiet way, is the only offering that has ever mattered. So maybe the real evolution of sacrifice isn't that we stopped spilling blood. It's that we started spilling truth. Every honest conversation, every act of courage, every moment of humility is a small rebellion against the old gods of fear. It's saying, I'll give up pretending in exchange for being real. And perhaps that's what the ancients were reaching for all along. Not divine favor, but divine connection. The moment when giving stops being a plea and becomes a declaration. I trust life enough to let it take what it needs. It's a strange, liberating thought. Maybe the universe doesn't want our suffering. It just wants our sincerity. Maybe the altar was never about appeasing something outside us, but awakening something inside. And when you finally see it that way, every act of release, every heartbreak, every decision, every goodbye becomes a sacred exchange. You stop asking what the gods want and start realizing that you are what they wanted all along. The offering, the fire, the transformation, all of it was leading you back to yourself. If you think about it, sacrifice has always been humanity's favorite misunderstanding. We started with the idea that giving something up would buy us safety, and we ended up learning that giving something up is the only way to feel alive. Somewhere between those two discoveries, we invented religion, economics, therapy, and self-help books. It's impressive, really. All the ways we've tried to make peace with the same truth. You can't keep everything. You can't even keep yourself the same forever. Life keeps collecting its dues, and it accepts payment in every currency. Time, love, sleep, sanity. The funny part is that the universe never sends a receipt, so we keep overpaying just to be sure. It's easy to laugh at ancient people sacrificing animals, but at least their deals were clear. They gave a goat, got a harvest. We, on the other hand, sacrifice clarity itself. We give away our attention to endless noise and call it staying informed. We trade presents for productivity and call it progress. If you could time travel and show a priest from Babylon a modern office building, he'd probably just say, I see, a temple of endurance. Who's your god? And we'd have to admit, we're not entirely sure. Maybe it's ambition. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's Wi-Fi. There's a strange beauty in how sacrifice mirrors the seasons of nature. Everything alive is constantly dying in small doses to make room for something else. Trees shed their leaves, the body sheds its cells, stars collapse into new worlds. Humans, though, resist the rhythm. We cling to things long past their time. Ideas, roles, identities. We'd rather hoard the old leaves than face the bareness of winter. Maybe that's why ancient people found comfort in ritual. It gave structure to the pain of letting go. When you know what to offer and when, the chaos feels less personal. The tragedy of modernity is that we lost the script but kept the ache. That ache shows up everywhere, disguised as busyness or ambition. You see it in people who can't rest, who treat exhaustion like a merit badge. You see it in relationships that keep going long after love has packed its bags, simply because quitting feels like failure. In a world obsessed with accumulation, sacrifice feels like heresy. But here's the cosmic joke. Every time we refuse to let go, life eventually takes it anyway, just with more drama. The universe has patience, but not mercy. It waits until we're gripping the thing so tightly that losing it becomes a spiritual exorcism. Still, we keep believing we can bargain, that if we just work hard enough, behave well enough, pray convincingly enough, maybe we can skip the lost part. It's a comforting delusion, and it has kept therapists employed for decades. But it also reveals something tender, the childlike part of humanity that still hopes the rules can be bent with enough sincerity. Every ritual ever performed, from tribal dances to late-night journaling, carries that same innocent logic. Maybe if I show I care deeply enough, reality will be kind. It rarely is, but somehow the effort still matters. What's fascinating is how every great civilization reached a point where they tried to transcend the physical side of sacrifice. When the blood stopped flowing, philosophy began. The Greeks turned it into tragedy, the Hindus turned it into karma, the Buddhists turned it into detachment. It's as if humanity collectively realized, we can't keep killing things forever, let's try thinking instead. And yet, the emotional mechanics stayed the same. Every path to enlightenment still demands a kind of death, the death of ego, illusion, or control. Apparently, the gods of wisdom are just as fond of drama as the gods of thunder were. Maybe that's the secret. Sacrifice was never really about what we lost, but about what we were willing to risk becoming. The moment you offer something up, truly, freely, you break the illusion of ownership. You stop pretending the universe is a vending machine where good deeds buy good outcomes. You start participating in life, not managing it. That's what makes genuine surrender so terrifying. It's not just loss, it's exposure. You step into uncertainty without the armor of control, and the only thing left to trust is the rhythm itself. And maybe that's why the ancients personified the universe as a god, because it's easier to face uncertainty if you can talk to it. The moment you name it, you feel less small. Fear becomes dialogue. Please, sky, don't kill me. Please, luck, stay a little longer. It's a form of poetry disguised as desperation. And if you listen closely, we still do it. Every time we mutter please before an exam, or thank God after finding our keys. We laugh at superstition, but language itself was born out of prayer. Every word we speak is an offering to order in a chaotic world. That's the thread connecting all forms of sacrifice, the attempt to make chaos conversational. It's not about blood or gifts or punishment. It's about relationship, between humans and the unknown, between what we want and what must be. When we stopped calling it sacrifice and started calling it meaning, the ritual didn't vanish. It just got a better PR team. Even in science, progress happens through loss. Old theories die so new ones can live. Nature's rulebook doesn't change just because we do. And there's a quiet comedy in all of it. After thousands of years of rituals, temples, wars, and philosophies, humanity has finally arrived at the same conclusion the first cave dweller probably reached while watching fire. To live is to burn something. Time, energy, certainty. Take your pick. The real question isn't if you'll sacrifice, but what for. And maybe that's the only freedom we ever truly get, to decide which altar is worthy of our offering. When you understand that, everything changes. Loss stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like participation. You begin to see that giving something up isn't an act of despair. It's a vote of faith in what comes next. The ancients looked at the fire and saw gods. We look at the same flame and see chemistry. But the feeling is identical. Something deep in us still stirs when we let go, because it's in that emptiness that we glimpse creation itself. Maybe that's why every culture, in its own strange way, kept the ritual alive. Not because the gods demanded it, but because our souls did. And maybe, just maybe, they still do. If you look closely at the history of sacrifice, you start to realize something strange. Humans were never just trying to please the gods. They were trying to make themselves feel like they mattered. Every burnt offering, every drop of blood, every whispered prayer was really a declaration of importance. Look, universe, I exist. I can give something valuable. I can make a difference. It was less about devotion and more about dignity. The primal need to prove that our small lives could touch something infinite. And maybe that's the heart of it. Sacrifice began as our way of negotiating with the void. There's a certain humor in that image, a frail creature on a spinning rock, shaking a stick at the sky and saying, "Notice me." It sounds absurd, but it's also profoundly human. Even now we do the same thing, only we've replaced altars with social media. We offer our time, our privacy, our emotional stability, and in return, we hope for the digital equivalent of divine approval. A heart, a like, a share. The ancient gods may have demanded incense, but at least they didn't track your engagement rate. Our altars glow blue now, and the fire never goes out. But what lies beneath all these rituals, old or new, is that hunger for connection. Sacrifice, in its purest form, wasn't just about control, it was about relationship. It was how humans said, "We see you, and we want to be seen." There's a reason people sacrificed their first harvest or their firstborn. Those weren't just offerings of fear, but of intimacy. They were acts of ultimate vulnerability. To give your best, your first, your most beloved, was to say, "You matter more than I do." It was love distorted through the lens of terror. And that's what makes it so fascinating. Fear and love were never opposites in ancient thought. They were partners. The gods weren't just to be adored, they were to be respected, even feared. Because fear, in a twisted way, was proof of belief. You don't fear what you think is fake. The first worshippers understood something modern spirituality often forgets, that awe is born from the tension between wonder and danger. It's not supposed to feel safe. If the divine never unsettles you, it's probably just a mirror. But the relationship was never one-sided. The more humans offered, the more they began to expect something back. The concept of reciprocity, give and receive, was born at the altar. If I sacrifice, then you, great sky, will reward me. And just like that, religion became the first form of customer service. You could almost imagine a Babylonian priest saying, "We appreciate your offering. Your rain should arrive within 3 to 5 business days." The idea that the universe owed us something for our effort, that's where civilization itself started to take shape. Law, economy, morality, all of it grew from this cosmic barter system. The irony, of course, is that once humans began believing they could influence fate, they also started competing over who could do it best. Sacrifice turned into spectacle. Who could build the bigger temple, spill more blood, sing louder, kneel longer? The more dramatic the offering, the more it seemed to prove devotion. And let's be honest, we still do this. We may not slaughter animals, but we love to perform our suffering. "Look how much I've endured," we say, as if pain automatically equals virtue. It's the same ancient logic, dressed up in modern clothes. What's truly fascinating is how the power of sacrifice eventually migrated from the temple to the self. Instead of giving the gods our livestock, we began giving them our behavior. We sacrificed desire, freedom, and individuality. The body became the altar, and guilt became the priest. You didn't need fire anymore. Shame could do the burning for you, and for centuries that idea ruled human hearts. The belief that to be pure, you must hurt. That to be worthy, you must bleed, even if only metaphorically. The line between faith and self-punishment blurred until they became the same thing. But somewhere, quietly, something began to shift. People started asking uncomfortable questions. What if the gods never asked for this? What if sacrifice was humanity's invention all along, a mirror of our own insecurity projected onto the heavens? That's when philosophy was born, when people stopped praying to the gods and started asking about them. It wasn't rebellion, it was curiosity. And that curiosity was the beginning of liberation. Because the moment you realize the gods might not be hungry for your suffering, you start to see the world differently. You stop trying to appease everything outside you and begin exploring everything within. That shift didn't destroy sacrifice, it redefined it. Instead of death, it became transformation. Instead of guilt, it became growth. Every time someone gives up arrogance for humility, anger for compassion, fear for courage, that's a modern sacrifice. The altar is internal now, and the offering is awareness. And while the ancient rituals were meant to protect humanity from chaos, this new kind of sacrifice invites us into it. To live fully means to risk fully, to let parts of yourself die so something new can live. The old priests would have called that dangerous. The mystics call it awakening. What makes it even more poetic is that science eventually caught up with the mystics. Physics tells us that energy never dies. It just changes form. Nothing is lost, only transformed. In that sense, the ancient sacrifices weren't wrong. They were just literal. They intuited what we now understand symbolically, that to create, something must give way. Every invention, every discovery, every love story, every revolution, all of it built on loss. The universe itself began with an explosion, a sacrifice of unity for the sake of expansion. Maybe creation and destruction were never opposites at all, just two sides of the same heartbeat. And that realization changes everything. It means sacrifice isn't about fear. It's about participation. It's the rhythm of existence itself. When you stop fighting it, you start flowing with it. You stop asking, why do I have to lose this? And start asking, what wants to be born in its place? That's not resignation. That's evolution. The ancients stared into the fire and imagined gods. We stare into our own reflection and see the same spark. Maybe that's what the whole ritual was for. Not to feed the divine, but to recognize that we were divine all along. There's something both comic and sacred in that realization. Thousands of years of blood, prayer, guilt, and incense, all to learn that what the universe wanted was awareness, not apology. The gods, it seems, were never demanding sacrifice. They were demonstrating it. Every sunset, every falling leaf, every wave returning to the sea, all silent sermons on how to let go beautifully. We just needed a few millennia to take the hint. Somewhere along the road from fire pits to fluorescent lights, humanity made a quiet trade. We stopped sacrificing animals and started sacrificing meaning. It's funny when you think about it. Ancient people burned goats, hoping to make sense of thunder, and now we burn out ourselves, trying to make sense of emails. The gods of rain and war retired, but the gods of stress and status never left. They just changed wardrobe. And the cruel thing is, we still worship them the same way, with exhaustion, anxiety, and the quiet fear that we're not offering enough. But maybe that's the real tragedy of progress. We became too sophisticated to kneel, yet we never stopped begging. We used to plead for rain, now we plead for relevance. We used to sacrifice bodies, now we sacrifice boundaries. The altar just became invisible, tucked somewhere between your calendar and your conscience. There's something darkly comedic about that, as if humanity decided to evolve spiritually but forgot to tell its nervous system. And the funny part is that deep down, we still crave ritual. The human mind doesn't cope well with chaos, so it keeps inventing symbolic ways to feel in control. We may not have temples anymore, but we build routines with the same devotion. Coffee in the morning, screens at night, tiny acts of worship to the gods of continuity. And we light candles now not to summon spirits, but to calm the ones we already have. The scent of lavender replaced the smell of blood, but the logic hasn't changed. Create order even if it's imaginary. That's why sacrifice in some form has always been essential to how we build meaning. It forces a choice. What will you give up, and for what? The power isn't in the offering, it's in the prioritization. The moment you choose to let something go, you define what matters most. Ancient farmers gave up part of their harvest to the gods to bless the rest. Modern humans give up free time to protect their careers. The context changes, but the psychology stays the same. Sacrifice is the grammar of commitment. You can't say, I love, without also saying, I'll give. Of course, we've taken that grammar and turned it into performance art. The modern world has a talent for making everything look noble, even self-destruction. Look how busy I am, we say, as though suffering were a badge of honor. It's the same old ritual, just with better lighting. Maybe that's why burnout feels so eerily familiar. We call it a modern epidemic, but it's just ancient sacrifice rebranded. We used to kill lambs for salvation, now we kill our peace of mind for validation. Either way, something innocent dies. But if you look closer, there's still something beautiful hiding in this madness. The instinct to give up, to release, to dedicate. It's not all delusion. It's also the root of empathy, creativity, even love. Every parent, artist, teacher, or healer carries a little of that sacred impulse. To give of yourself for the sake of something beyond yourself, that's the closest we ever get to touching eternity. The problem isn't sacrifice itself, it's forgetting why we do it. When the offering becomes mindless, it loses its magic. The ancients, for all their superstition, understood that part better than we do. Their rituals, strange as they seem, always ended with gratitude. After the offering, they'd feast, sing, celebrate. They knew that death and life were two halves of the same heartbeat. That cycle gave them sanity. But in our world, we've lost the second half. We sacrifice endlessly, but we forget to celebrate. We give and give, but we never stop to eat the feast. Maybe that's why we're always hungry, not for food, but for closure. And that hunger leaks into everything. We chase achievement like it's an X we can't get over. We hoard possessions and call it security. We collect experiences, but forget to feel them. It's like we're stuck in a loop, offering everything, yet receiving nothing because we've forgotten how to recognize enough. The ancients feared angering the gods. We fear missing opportunities. But both fears come from the same root, the terror of emptiness. That if we stop offering, even for a second, the world will forget us. It's almost poetic, how sacrifice mirrors the human condition itself. We're born giving up something, comfort, innocence, certainty, and we keep doing it until the end. Life is one long series of negotiations with loss. The trick isn't to avoid it, but to give it meaning. Maybe that's why every culture that survived its own chaos eventually turned sacrifice into story. Myths became a way of recycling pain into wisdom. They said, yes, something was lost, but here's what we gained. That's how civilizations heal, by turning the wound into a narrative. You can still see that instinct today in small, everyday gestures. A nurse working overnight, a friend listening when they're tired, a stranger holding the door. These aren't grand sacrifices, but they come from the same ancient pulse, the quiet agreement that we belong to each other. That's what the first rituals were trying to express in smoke and song. Sacrifice was never about violence. It was about belonging. It said, my life touches yours, and that matters. And perhaps that's the realization we keep circling back to century after century. The gods were just metaphors for connection. Between people, between earth and sky, between giving and receiving. When we stopped understanding that, the rituals turned cruel. When we remember it, even the smallest offering becomes holy again. A moment of honesty, a shared laugh, an act of forgiveness. These are the modern altars. They cost nothing but the ego, which, if we're honest, is the most expensive thing we own. Maybe that's the great cosmic joke, that all along, the universe didn't want our suffering, just our sincerity. It never asked for blood, only presence. Every time we slow down, breathe, and choose meaning over noise, we resurrect the original spirit of sacrifice, not as fear, but as awareness. And that's the twist that would have blown the minds of our ancestors, that the most sacred offering isn't what burns on the altar, but what stays behind when the fire goes out, the quiet realization that nothing truly given is ever lost. If there's one thing history proves beyond doubt, it's that humans are obsessed with the idea that pain equals meaning. Somewhere along the line, we decided that if something hurts, it must be important. Maybe that's why we turned sacrifice into an art form. Because suffering, when ritualized, feels less like chaos and more like purpose. The first humans probably realized this by accident. Imagine a tribe watching a storm tear through their crops. One person, desperate, throws an animal into the fire. And then, by coincidence, the rain stops. Congratulations, they just invented theology. And, unknowingly, the emotional logic of every bad relationship that ever followed. If I suffer enough, maybe it'll stop hurting. It's a darkly funny inheritance. We've evolved past the blood, sure, but not the psychology. We still think endurance buys redemption. That's why people brag about how little they sleep, how much they work, or how long they've held it together. It's the same ancient instinct, just in office attire. The altar got smaller, now it fits in your calendar. And instead of fire, we burn energy. It's almost impressive, really, how we can turn even exhaustion into a form of worship. But that's what makes sacrifice so fascinating. It's not just an act, it's a worldview. It's the belief that the universe is transactional, that if we give enough, we'll be spared. The ancients made offerings to avoid famine. We make sacrifices to avoid failure. Both are negotiations with uncertainty. We can laugh at the absurdity of throwing food into the fire to please invisible gods, but when you think about it, buying luxury products to attract abundance isn't much different. We've just changed the marketing. Manifestation is a prettier word for please don't let the sky fall. And yet, even in its most primitive form, sacrifice carried wisdom. It was humanity's first attempt to personalize the cosmos. The ritual made the invisible visible. The act of giving up something tangible turned fear into participation. That's what made the world feel negotiable. You weren't just a victim of fate anymore. You were a part of the conversation. It's easy to underestimate how revolutionary that was. That moment when humans stopped trembling in silence and started responding. Even if they got the mechanics wrong, they got the courage right. That courage, however, quickly morphed into spectacle. Once people realized that sacrifice gave them a sense of power, they wanted more of it. Bigger fires, louder chants, higher stakes. And like every human invention, it eventually became political. The priest became the middleman, the sacrifice became a tool, and fear became currency. What started as a dialogue with mystery turned into a monopoly on meaning. And that's when the real danger began. Because when someone tells you they alone can interpret what the gods want, you can bet the gods will start sounding suspiciously like them. But the universe, being wiser than our institutions, always finds a way to rebalance. Across time, new voices started to challenge the old order. Mystics, philosophers, poets, all asking the same rebellious question. What if the gods aren't out there at all? That question was the spiritual equivalent of discovering fire for the second time. It flipped the whole system. Suddenly, sacrifice wasn't about feeding deities, it was about refining the self. The battlefield moved from the temple to the heart. The new question wasn't, what must I give up to please them? But what must I release to become free? That shift is still unfolding. You can see it everywhere. In therapy sessions and meditation apps and every modern mantra about letting go. We've traded incense for introspection. But the challenge remains the same. Surrender doesn't come naturally. We want transformation without the dying part. We want the wisdom of letting go without the awkward silence that follows it. It's like wanting the phoenix without the fire. Yet every real act of renewal, whether personal or collective, still asks for the same old price. Something must be left behind. And that's the strange paradox of human evolution. We keep trying to invent versions of progress that don't involve loss, but the universe refuses the bargain. Every great turning point, from birth to art to revolution, is built on surrender. The mother gives up the comfort of her body to bring forth new life. The artist gives up certainty to create something that doesn't yet exist. The revolutionary gives up safety for truth. These aren't punishments, they're the structure of becoming. The ancients expressed it in blood, we express it in risk. Same courage, better tools. Still, we can't help but add a little drama to it. Humans don't just want meaning, we want spectacle. We don't just want to change, we want the soundtrack, the symbolism, the movie moment where everything clicks. That's why every major change in life, every heartbreak, career leap, or identity shift feels so theatrical. Somewhere inside, we're all still performing for the gods, even if the gods have been replaced by our own reflection. Maybe that's why rituals never fully die, because deep down we crave a sense that the universe is watching, that our suffering is being witnessed, that it counts. There's a certain tenderness in that realization. The need for witness isn't weakness, it's what makes us human. The act of sacrifice, stripped of its blood and superstition, is really just an invitation to be seen by others, by life, by ourselves. Every time we say, I'll give this up, what we're really saying is, I want to matter. And that's what connects us across centuries and continents to the people who once stood around those fires, trembling under the same sky. The rituals have changed, but the longing hasn't. Maybe that's the point we were always trying to reach. The understanding that sacrifice isn't about appeasing forces outside us, but aligning with the force inside us that knows when it's time to release. The universe doesn't ask for pain, it asks for participation. It doesn't want your suffering, it wants your sincerity. And once you see that, even loss starts to look like a form of creation. Because in the end, the ashes left after every offering aren't reminders of death. They're the soil where the next beginning quietly waits to grow. Sacrifice, for all its darkness, has always been about one thing: control. Humans can endure almost anything, as long as they feel they had a say in it. That's why the earliest sacrifices were so emotionally charged. They turned helplessness into participation. You can't stop the rain, but you can offer something to the storm. You can't stop death, but you can decide how it happens. It's grimly empowering in a way. When you choose your loss, it doesn't feel like defeat. It feels like meaning. And if you've ever quit a job before getting fired or ended a relationship before it ended you, you know exactly what that feels like. But the problem with meaning is that once you taste it, you can't stop craving it. People began sacrificing not out of fear, but out of habit, because giving something up made them feel connected to something bigger. The fire wasn't just about pleasing gods anymore, it was about lighting up the darkness inside. That's the part we rarely talk about. The act of sacrifice didn't just feed deities, it fed identity. It made people feel powerful, useful, necessary. The more we gave, the more we existed. Which might explain why, even in the modern world, we define ourselves by what we're willing to endure. It's strange to think that suffering became our proof of sincerity. We don't trust ease, it feels suspicious. If something comes too easily, we assume it can't be valuable. We've built entire cultures around this bias. Work harder, push through, no pain, no gain. You see it everywhere. From religion to capitalism to fitness influencers yelling at you through your phone. And it's hilarious in a tragic sort of way. Humanity managed to retire the gods, but kept the whip. We replaced divine wrath with deadlines and called it progress. Yet deep beneath the absurdity, there's a kind of poetry. Sacrifice at its best wasn't just about loss, it was about transformation. The offering burned, yes, But what rose from the ashes was something invisible and sacred. Smoke became a metaphor for transcendence, a way to say this pain has meaning beyond itself. Even now, when people talk about letting go, what they really mean is burning something invisible, an ego, a grudge, a version of themselves that no longer fits. It's the same instinct dressed in self-help language. The fire just moved from the altar to the psyche. But of course, humans being humans, we couldn't resist turning even transcendence into a competition. Somewhere between the temple and the TED Talk, we made sacrifice sound like a brand strategy. I wake up at 4 a.m. Someone brags. I haven't taken a day off in years. Another says, it's not devotion anymore, it's marketing. The world became one giant ritual of overcompensation, and we started confusing exhaustion with virtue. It's as if the collective human species decided that the only way to prove we're evolving is to suffer with better posture. The irony is that the most meaningful sacrifices have nothing to do with pain at all. They're about presence. They're quiet, invisible, and deeply human. Like choosing to listen instead of talk. Like forgiving someone who doesn't deserve it. Like walking away from something that once defined you. Those are the modern offerings. No fire, no audience, just the private courage to release control. The ancients would have called it holy. We just call it uncomfortable. But it's the same energy. The surrender that makes space for something new. That's what makes the history of sacrifice so mesmerizing. It's not a story of cruelty. It's a story of evolution. Every civilization used it as a mirror to see itself. The Egyptians turned it into ceremony, the Greeks into theater, the Christians into redemption, and modern humanity into productivity. Each version reflected its own obsession, fear, glory, guilt, success, and each time, the meaning drifted a little further from the source. But the pulse remained. The belief that what you give defines what you become. It's hardwired into us, like a spiritual reflex we've never quite outgrown, and maybe we're not supposed to. Maybe the instinct to sacrifice is what keeps us from stagnation. It's the mechanism by which the universe forces growth. You can't build without dismantling. You can't love without risking loss. You can't evolve without leaving parts of yourself behind. It's the law of exchange written into everything, from cells regenerating to stars dying. Even the universe itself began with a kind of sacrifice. Unity exploded into multiplicity, trading wholeness for wonder. The Big Bang was just the first offering. So perhaps sacrifice was never meant to be a punishment. Maybe it was a language, a way of saying, I understand that everything is temporary, and I'm willing to participate anyway. That's the essence of it, isn't it? The courage to give without guarantee, to offer time, attention, or love without knowing if it will return. That's what makes it sacred. Not the fire, not the blood, but the willingness to act as if life itself is a conversation worth continuing. And maybe that's where the comedy lies. That, after thousands of years, we're still making offerings to the same mysterious silence, hoping it nods back. Whether it's a prayer, a painting, or a well-timed apology, every act of giving carries the same unspoken question. Was it enough? And maybe the answer was never supposed to come. Maybe the point was always the offering itself, the moment we choose meaning over comfort, connection over certainty. Because that's the real secret hiding in every ritual, ancient or modern. That sacrifice was never about losing. It was always about remembering who we are when everything else burns away. There's a strange beauty in how humanity has always tried to make deals with the universe. From the beginning, we've treated existence like a contract. Give something, get something. Offer a sacrifice, earn protection. Work hard, deserve success. Love deeply, receive love back. It sounds logical, fair even, until you realize the universe never signed the other half of the agreement. We're the only ones keeping score. Maybe that's why sacrifice has always carried this bittersweet taste, because somewhere deep down we know we're the only ones measuring what it's worth. And yet, we keep giving. That's what fascinates me most. Even when we know there's no guarantee, no divine accounting system, we still offer. Parents give up dreams for their children. Artists pour themselves into work that may never be seen. Friends show up for each other with no promise of reciprocity. In that sense, sacrifice might be the purest form of faith. Not in gods, but in connection. The belief that giving is meaningful, even when no one's watching. Maybe that's what made the ancients burn their offerings with such conviction. Not because they knew the gods existed, but because they needed to believe that generosity did. It's easy to see why that need became so universal. Sacrifice, in all its forms, gave humanity something that chaos couldn't. Rhythm. The ritual made time feel cyclical, predictable. The grain you offered this year would return as harvest next year. It wasn't just religion, it was reassurance disguised as ceremony. Every culture found its own version of that comfort. The Mayans with their bloodletting, the Celts with their fire festivals, the Japanese with offerings of rice and sake. Behind every knife, bowl, or flame was the same message. If I give something up now, the world will keep turning. It's not primitive, it's practical. And if you think about it, we still do it. We call it planning ahead. But the problem with rituals is that they work too well. Once people learned that giving up something created a sense of control, they started pushing it to extremes. More sacrifice must mean more favor. More suffering must mean more virtue. It's the same logic that drives modern overachievers. If the gods don't notice me yet, maybe I just need to suffer louder. There's something tragically comic about that, how our desire for safety keeps leading us right back into self-inflicted pain. The temples may be gone, but the psychology remains. Maybe if I burn a little more of myself, the world will finally be kind. And yet, the ancient instinct still hides a kind of wisdom we've forgotten. The art of intentional loss. Sacrifice, when done consciously, is really about alignment. It's the act of saying, this thing no longer serves who I'm becoming. When a snake sheds its skin, we call it nature. When a person does it, we call it crisis. But both are necessary. The ancients understood that. That's why their sacrifices followed the seasons. Not just agricultural, but emotional ones too. Winter was for mourning, spring for renewal. They didn't resist change. They ritualized it. Maybe the reason modern life feels so restless is because we've lost that rhythm. We delete instead of grieve, move on instead of transform. The fire still burns, but we've forgotten how to use it. It's funny. Even our language betrays this legacy. We say things like career sacrifice, sacrificing for love, sacrificing sleep for success. The word has stayed, but the soul of it has changed. It used to mean offering to the divine. Now it means neglecting yourself for approval. Somewhere in the shuffle, we turned a spiritual act into a business model. And maybe that's the problem. The ancients sacrificed to feel connected to life, while we sacrifice to feel worthy of it. But despite all the distortions, sacrifice still works. Not because it changes the world, but because it changes us. Every time you let go of something you thought you couldn't live without, a small piece of your fear dies with it. That's why the ancients treated sacrifice as purification. It wasn't about blood or flames, it was about clarity. They knew that you can't hold on to everything and still grow. Something always has to burn. An illusion, an attachment, an outdated version of yourself. Growth, like fire, is both beautiful and cruel. And maybe that's what sacrifice was trying to teach all along. That loss isn't the opposite of abundance. It's the doorway to it. You can't receive with closed fists. The gods didn't demand offerings because they were greedy. They demanded them because they understood how humans hoard. Comfort, control, certainty. The offering was never for them. It was training for us. And once you realize that, even the strangest ancient rituals start to make sense. The fire, the blood, the chanting, all of it was a metaphor for something timeless, the courage to trust the unknown. It's humbling when you think about it. Thousands of years ago, people stood under the same sky we see now, holding the same fears, hunger, loss, insignificance, and they found a way to turn those fears into art, into meaning, into rhythm. We still do the same thing, just with different tools. We light candles for memories, write songs for heartbreaks, start new lives after old ones fall apart. The rituals are quieter, but the soul of them is the same. We still need ceremony to remind us that endings are sacred, that letting go isn't failure, and that what we release doesn't vanish. It transforms. And maybe that's the final irony of sacrifice. It began as humanity's way of bargaining with gods, but it ended up revealing something divine within ourselves. Every offering, from the first fire to the last tear shed in silence, was really just a rehearsal for one truth, that the essence of life is exchange. Breath in, breath out, gain, lose, begin, end. And maybe the gods never wanted our offerings because they didn't need them. They wanted us to learn what they already knew, that everything sacred is temporary. And that's what makes it worth giving. It's strange how humans learn to turn fear into ceremony. You'd think that fear would make us hide, run or fight, but instead, we dressed it in ritual robes and gave it rhythm. Somewhere in prehistory, someone realized that if you can't escape fear, you can choreograph it. You can contain it. You can even make it beautiful. That's what sacrifice was at its core. Not madness or cruelty, but choreography for the chaos we couldn't control. When lightning struck or the river dried up, people didn't just panic. They prepared the stage. They lit fires, sang chants, drew circles on the ground. Because if you can't stop the storm, at least you can dance with it. That's the human genius, our refusal to face terror in silence. We turn even our despair into theater. You see it in everything from religion to reality TV. When we can't fix a problem, we perform it. The ancient priest raising a knife over a lamb is not so different from someone publicly cutting ties with negativity on social media. Both are gestures of control in an uncontrollable world. And let's be honest, both have an audience. The difference is that the priest had thunder to impress, while we have algorithms. But the deeper you look, the clearer it becomes that sacrifice wasn't only about fear. It was about intimacy. When a tribe offered its best animal or its last grain, it wasn't just negotiating with the gods, it was confessing vulnerability. It was saying, we don't know what's coming next, but we're willing to give up something we love to stay connected to the mystery. That's not savagery, that's trust. There's a strange tenderness in that gesture. like a child handing you their favorite toy just to make sure you'll come back tomorrow. We've forgotten that tenderness. Today we trade our time, health, and peace for things that never hug us back. The gods used to demand goats. Now they demand Wi-Fi passwords. And yet, the emotional logic remains unchanged. We still believe that giving something precious makes us worthy of something greater. Maybe that's why heartbreak hurts so much. Because when we give our love, we expect the universe to notice, but it rarely does. The ancients would have called that divine mystery. We call it ghosting. And while they burned incense and waited for omens, we stare at our phones and wait for a message that never comes. The technology changed, but the ache didn't. This is where sacrifice reveals its paradox. The act of giving up something doesn't guarantee reward. It guarantees revelation. Every offering, whether to a god or to a dream, teaches you what truly matters. If it breaks you, it's because you were too attached. If it frees you, it's because you finally understood what you could live without. That's what the old rituals were secretly teaching all along. That ownership is an illusion. The only thing you can really possess is the courage to let go. And yet, we resist that lesson with everything we have. We hoard time, love, opinions, grudges. We cling to them like trophies, terrified of emptiness. But here's the cosmic joke. Emptiness isn't punishment, it's invitation. Every time you let go of something, you create space for something else to arrive. The ancients symbolized this with fire because fire transforms everything it touches. It consumes, yes, but it also purifies. That's why ashes were always sacred. They were the proof that destruction could be holy. It's a poetic idea, really. Every time something ends, something invisible begins. You can see traces of this even in science. Stars die so that heavier elements, carbon, oxygen, iron, can form. Every breath you take is literally built from the ashes of a sacrifice that happened billions of years ago. In a cosmic sense, you are living proof that destruction and creation are the same process, seen from different angles. The ancients didn't have telescopes, but they understood this intuitively. They saw it in the cycle of crops, the waxing and waning of the moon, the way every dawn required a night to precede it. Sacrifice wasn't about appeasing gods. It was about acknowledging that death and life were lovers, not enemies. But we moderns, with our smart devices and endless distractions, have lost that intimacy with endings. We treat loss like a malfunction, not a metamorphosis. We panic when things fall apart, forgetting that falling apart is how new shapes form. The irony is that in trying to avoid sacrifice, we end up living half-lives, cluttered with unfinished emotions, unspoken truths, and unopened doors. Maybe that's why therapy feels so much like confession and why minimalism feels so spiritual. We're rediscovering, in secular language, what the ancients already knew, that clarity is born from surrender. Still, we shouldn't romanticize ancient sacrifices too much. Many were brutal, bloody, and undeniably tragic. But even that horror reveals something profound about the human psyche, the desperate longing to be seen by the cosmos. Those acts, however misguided, were attempts to start a dialogue with existence. We wanted the universe to answer back. We still do. That's why people talk to stars, pray to gods, or scream into pillows. It's all the same impulse, to not feel alone in the immensity of it all. Maybe that's why humor always sneaks its way into darkness. Even in the heaviest rituals, there were moments of absurdity. A priest tripping over his robe, a villager mispronouncing a chant. Laughter, like sacrifice, is an offering. It breaks tension, humanizes fear, and reminds us that even the sacred doesn't take itself too seriously. The universe, after all, is one giant irony, infinite and mysterious, yet constantly relying on our clumsy rituals to feel alive within us. So perhaps sacrifice was never about death at all. Perhaps it was about participation, the willingness to show up for life, even when it terrifies us, to say, I'll give something of myself, not because I have to, but because I choose to. Every act of creation, love, and forgiveness carries that same pulse. You lose a piece of yourself, but in return you become more whole. That's the ancient wisdom disguised beneath all the ashes. That in every sincere act of letting go, we stop being spectators of life and start becoming part of its rhythm again. And maybe that's all the gods ever wanted. Not our fear, but our participation in the grand, ridiculous, beautiful ceremony of being alive. There's a strange pattern in human history. Every time we think we've outgrown sacrifice, we just reinvent it with better lighting. The ancient temples may have turned into office buildings, the altars into boardrooms, and the priests into motivational speakers, but the logic hasn't changed. We still offer time, energy, and even sanity in exchange for something we can't quite name. Approval, meaning, transcendence, maybe just peace. The gods have new names now: success, love, legacy. But the offerings look hauntingly familiar. It's almost funny if it weren't so tragic. We've traded lambs for deadlines, blood for burnout, and incense for caffeine. You can see it everywhere once you start noticing. The gym becomes a modern ritual site, mirrors lining the walls like the eyes of judgmental deities. People lift, sweat, and chant under the glowing light of flat screens. punishing themselves to feel worthy of admiration. Others sacrifice sleep for ambition, scrolling through motivational quotes at 2 a.m. As if enlightenment could be delivered via Wi-Fi. The tools are modern, but the impulse is ancient. To prove to the invisible forces around us, society, family, God, algorithms, that we deserve to exist. And maybe that's what's so fascinating about the human mind, our obsession with worth. We seem incapable of believing that life could love us back without conditions. The ancients believed the sun wouldn't rise without their offerings. We believe we won't matter without our productivity. Both are equally delusional and equally touching, because beneath that madness lies something deeply human, the need to belong to the rhythm of the universe, to feel that what we give somehow keeps the world spinning. That's why sacrifice has always been a paradox. It's both noble and naive, both selfless and selfish. To give something up implies a longing to receive something back. Safety, love, redemption, understanding. And even when we claim we expect nothing, deep down, we all keep score. Every parent who's ever said, "I gave you everything," knows that the idea of pure sacrifice doesn't exist. We give because we want connection, even if that connection is just the quiet comfort of believing we've done enough. It's not hypocrisy, it's humanity. But here's the twist that ancient rituals understood better than we do. The real transformation never came from the offering itself, it came from the silence afterward. That heavy, still moment when the fire dies down, the crowd disperses, and the air smells like burnt hope. That's where growth begins. The void that follows the act of sacrifice is what terrifies us, and yet it's the very space where meaning is born. That's why modern life feels so claustrophobic. We've kept the giving, but deleted the silence. We fill every pause with noise, every ache with distraction. The ritual continues, but the reflection is gone. It's interesting how even religions that tried to abolish sacrifice couldn't let go of the idea entirely. Christianity replaced the altar with the cross, turning one ultimate act of suffering into the eternal symbol of redemption. Buddhism transformed physical sacrifice into internal discipline. The burning wasn't of flesh, but of attachment. Every tradition reinterpreted the same human longing, the belief that something must die for something else to live. Even our stories follow that rhythm. Every hero's journey demands a loss. Every redemption arc requires a cost. You can't have transformation without a funeral. It's not just mythology, it's psychology. When people go through profound change, they almost always describe it in the language of sacrifice. I had to let go of my old self. I lost everything before I found peace. I had to burn it all down to rebuild. It's the same pattern dressed in modern vocabulary. The self becomes the altar, the ego the offering, and the moment of surrender the fire. We like to think of progress as linear, but it's actually cyclical. Birth, death, rebirth, an endless pattern of small sacrifices disguised as choices. What's ironic is that the more civilized we become, the more sterile our rituals of surrender have grown. We've replaced primal release with polite restraint. The ancient villagers screamed and danced under the moonlight to process their fear. We send a thinking of you text and hope it counts as emotional catharsis. Maybe that's why anxiety feels like the new plague. We've forgotten how to properly give things up. The body still remembers the fire, but the mind refuses to light it. We want transformation without the mess, redemption without the ash. Still, not everything about modern sacrifice is tragic. There's beauty in how we've learned to turn pain into art. The ancient priest offered blood, the modern poet offers words. Both acts are equally vulnerable. Standing before the unknown, handing over something intimate, hoping it will mean something to someone else. Even comedy, in its own way, is a form of sacrifice. Think about it. Comedians turn their humiliation into laughter so others can feel less alone. That's the essence of every ritual, shared vulnerability disguised as performance. Maybe that's what we're missing, the communal part. Ancient sacrifices weren't solitary acts, they were collective affirmations. The whole village gathered not to watch someone suffer, but to remember together that life demands participation. Today, our sacrifices are private. We suffer quietly behind screens, convinced that no one else could possibly understand. But if we dared to share it, to make our struggles visible again, maybe we'd rediscover what the ancients knew, that sacrifice isn't just loss, it's communication. It's saying, here, take a piece of me, and through it, see yourself. And perhaps that's where the cycle finally comes full circle, back to connection. Because if you strip away the blood, the smoke, the superstition, every sacrifice is really about one thing: belonging. To the tribe, to the earth, to the story of being alive. That's the secret thread that ties all of history's rituals together. From the first hunter leaving an offering for the spirits, to the artist posting their work into the digital void, we're all trying to answer the same silent question. Does what I give matter? Maybe it does. Maybe the act of giving, of releasing control, of trusting the unseen, is what keeps the balance between chaos and creation. And maybe, just maybe, every time we give something we love back to the fire, whether it's time, pride, or pain, the universe takes a breath and whispers, now we can begin again. It's almost comical how humanity has spent thousands of years trying to convince the universe to notice us. We've written poems to the stars, carved prayers into stone, built cathedrals taller than reason itself, all in hopes that something out there might whisper back, "Yes, I see you." Maybe that's why sacrifice became so central to our story. It was our first language with the divine. Before philosophy, before science, before therapy, there was fire. People believed that if they gave something precious enough, a lamb, a song, a piece of themselves, the universe would respond. But here's the secret that no one likes to admit. The universe did respond, just not in the way we expected. Because the moment you give something up, you change. That's the real exchange. You lose your sense of control, your comfort, your illusion of permanence, and in that empty space, something new is born. The sacrifice doesn't buy divine favor, it buys clarity. The ancients didn't need to hear the gods speak. They needed to hear themselves think. The fire, the chanting, the blood, all of it was theater designed to make silence unbearable enough that the truth had to appear. And if you've ever sat alone with your thoughts for more than 5 minutes, you know exactly what that feels like. What makes it even more fascinating is that they weren't completely wrong. There's real psychology behind it. Rituals, as strange as they look to us now, were early forms of emotional regulation. The act of offering something, a meal, an animal, a part of your own comfort, creates a tangible symbol of release. It's one thing to say you're letting go, it's another to watch something burn, vanish, and transform before your eyes. It's closure, ancient edition. You could say the first therapists wore robes and carried torches instead of clipboards. And yet, there's humor buried in the seriousness of it all. Imagine being a prehistoric human, terrified of thunder, deciding that maybe throwing your best chicken into a fire will solve it. That's optimism on a level we rarely reach anymore. Today, we call customer service for lesser miracles. But at least those early humans tried to negotiate with mystery instead of pretending to control it. In some twisted way, they were more honest about their fear than we are. We pretend we've evolved beyond superstition. Yet every time our phone battery dies at 2%, we start praying to invisible powers just the same. The irony is that for all our technological progress, we still don't understand the trade between giving and receiving. We think sacrifice is something to be avoided, a sign of weakness or loss, when in truth it's the mechanism of growth. Every skill, every love, every dream demands a piece of you. You can't learn without unlearning, you can't love without losing, and you can't live without eventually giving up the illusion that you'll stay forever. The ancients knew this instinctively. They saw life as a constant rhythm of offering and renewal, but we've made a sport of resisting it. Maybe that's why modern people feel so restless. We don't have real rituals anymore. We have coping mechanisms disguised as hobbies. We scroll, shop, binge, and call it self-care, when what we're really doing is avoiding the silence where the sacrifice should happen. It's not that we're worse than the ancients, we're just louder. We fill the space that was once sacred with notifications, as if being constantly reminded that we exist could replace the feeling of belonging. The fire became a screen, the prayer became a post. The gods, if they're watching, must find it all very entertaining, but there's something hopeful buried beneath the absurdity. Because even without the temples and the chants, the instinct to offer hasn't died. It's in the artist who paints knowing the world might not care. It's in the nurse who stays after her shift to hold someone's hand. It's in the friend who forgives before they're asked. These are our modern sacrifices. Quiet, invisible, often unacknowledged, but no less sacred. The altar just changed shape. It looks like an art studio, a hospital room, a kitchen at 2 a.m., where someone's still awake making soup for another human being. And what's beautiful is that this evolution of sacrifice has made it more personal, more internal. We no longer have to appease thunder or harvests. We have to confront our own storms. The fear we burn now isn't of gods, but of ourselves, our guilt, our ego, our expectations. It's not easier. If anything, it's harder. You can't bribe the universe with a goat when what it wants is your honesty. But in that discomfort lies real transformation. It's not about punishment, it's about precision. The slow carving away of everything false until what's left finally feels real. And maybe that's the hidden gift of all sacrifices, ancient or modern. They remind us that we're participants, not spectators, in the drama of existence. The blood and fire were never the point. They were metaphors, early special effects to illustrate the invisible. Because the truth is, every day you wake up, you're making offerings. You sacrifice rest for purpose, certainty for adventure, youth for wisdom. Even love is a form of ritual. Two people standing before the unknown saying, "I'll risk this." It's messy, beautiful, and terrifying. Which, come to think of it, is exactly how the universe works. And when you really look at it that way, you realize something profound. All along, the gods weren't demanding anything from us. They were teaching us how to let go. Every sacrifice, every ritual, every moment of surrender was just a rehearsal for the final act. The one where we learned that we were never burning things to please them. We were burning them to see the light. It's curious how every generation believes it has outgrown the need for rituals, only to quietly reinvent them under new names. The ancient priest stood before a fire. The modern worker stands before a screen. The offerings changed. No more grain, no more lambs, but the feeling stayed the same. That subtle trembling inside you before you send an important email, that moment you hold your breath before clicking submit on something that matters. That's the modern altar. You don't light incense, you refresh your inbox and pray for a sign from the digital gods that you're still worthy. It's hilarious, really. Humanity has always been religious, just never as accidentally as it is now. We talk about making sacrifices for the future, as if the future were some benevolent deity waiting to reward us. We give up rest, relationships, and joy to build monuments of productivity, all while pretending it's noble. The ancients at least admitted they were scared. They called it worship. We call it ambition. But deep down, it's the same transaction. A desperate hope that if we give enough, life will finally stop being unpredictable. And when it doesn't, we feel betrayed. We think, but I did everything right, as if the universe had a loyalty program. Still, there's something beautiful in that persistence. The human refusal to give up on meaning is almost comically admirable. We lose everything, start again, and still insist that our pain must count for something. Maybe that's why people find comfort in rituals. No, not because they guarantee results, but because they give shape to suffering. The act of lighting a candle or repeating a prayer creates a rhythm in chaos. It's a reminder that even when everything else falls apart, you can still control the flame. And that small act of control, that flicker of order, might be the thing that keeps us sane. But here's the trick. Once you realize that control is an illusion, sacrifice starts to look less like a payment and more like a performance. It's theater for the soul. The ancients built temples to dramatize their fears, to give cosmic weight to their losses. Today, we do the same thing, just with less imagination. We post long captions about our struggles, call it vulnerability, and wait for the likes to roll in. The altar has Wi-Fi now, but maybe it's okay. Maybe that's just how evolution expresses nostalgia. We can't live without ritual, so we disguise it as self-expression. It makes you wonder if our ancestors ever laughed at themselves. Did the high priest ever think, wait, why does that god of harvest need so many goats? Probably not. But if he did, I imagine he kept that thought to himself. You don't question the rules of your survival system, not when everyone else believes in it too. And that's what modern life gets wrong. We've replaced collective rituals with private obsessions. We don't burn offerings together. We burn out alone. The village used to gather to cry, dance, and sacrifice. Now we do it individually, on our lunch breaks, in between tasks, pretending we're fine. It's strange how progress has made us more solitary in our spirituality. The ancients screamed their prayers. We whisper ours to search engines. How do I stop feeling empty? Is the new, "Oh mighty God, hear me." The response time is faster, but the answers are just as vague. Maybe that's why, deep down, we crave something primitive again, something raw and communal, where our emotions aren't filtered through devices, a ritual where you can look at another human and know, without words, that they're lost too. Because what most people don't realize is that sacrifice wasn't about giving to the gods. It was about binding the people. Every ritual was a rehearsal for empathy. When the tribe offered its best harvest, everyone felt the loss together. They shared hunger, hope, and relief. The gods may have been silent, but the humans weren't. That's what made the ritual sacred. Not the blood, but the belonging. Today, we've mastered independence, but lost that sacred interdependence. We tell each other to be strong, to hustle, to stand on your own 2 feet. But maybe the point of sacrifice was never to stand alone. Maybe it was to kneel together. There's an ancient Greek myth that captures this perfectly. During a great famine, the people prayed to Demeter, the goddess of harvest. But she didn't respond. So instead of giving up, they shared what little they had with each other, turning their desperation into generosity. Eventually, the harvest returned, but not because of divine intervention. It returned because cooperation replaced fear. The gods rewarded the spirit of the offering, not the act itself. That's a message we still haven't fully learned. We keep sacrificing for approval instead of connection, forgetting that the universe doesn't care how much we give, it cares why. Maybe that's the true evolution of sacrifice, from transaction to transformation. The ancients burned animals to secure rain. We burn our illusions to find peace. Both acts involve smoke, loss, and a strange sense of release. Because letting go of comfort, of certainty, of ego is the only way anything new ever begins. We talk about reinventing ourselves as if it's a branding exercise, but it's really just a continuation of the oldest ritual in the world. Something has to die so something else can live, even if that something is just an outdated version of who we were yesterday. And maybe that's why, despite all our cleverness, we still can't stop performing little sacrifices every day. Staying kind when it's easier to be cruel. Choosing truth when lies would hurt less. Forgiving when revenge feels justified. These are the quiet altars of modern life. There's no fire, no chanting, no audience. Just you, the moment, and the chance to choose meaning over convenience. The ancients would have understood that perfectly. They'd probably bow their heads and say, "Ah, yes." The ritual continues, and it does, not in temples of stone, but in the small, invisible gestures that keep the human spirit from collapsing under its own cleverness. There's a strange comfort in knowing that everything alive is built on a quiet agreement with loss. The trees lose their leaves, the ocean loses its tides. Even stars, those arrogant little suns, eventually give in to gravity and collapse. And yet, we're the only species still shocked by it. Humans treat loss like an error in the system, a bug in the divine programming. We rage, bargain, cry, post about it, and then, because we're dramatic creatures, write poetry about how unfair it all is. The universe must find us adorable, because while we're out here trying to negotiate with mortality, everything else in creation just nods, sighs, and keeps going. That's what sacrifice was always trying to teach us, that loss isn't an accident, it's the engine of renewal. The ancients understood that far better than we do. They knew that to receive, you had to release, that every harvest was a resurrection built on decay. It wasn't morbid, it was math. Even soil needs the dead to stay fertile. The first farmers probably figured this out while burying something sacred and watching life bloom from it months later. And that realization, that life feeds on endings, became the first theology. If you want something to live, you must let something die. Today we call it personal growth, but it's the same process, just with more therapy and fewer torches. It's funny how, somewhere along the way, we started to believe we could bypass that rhythm. We industrialized everything: farming, faith, even emotions. We wanted results without decay, progress without pain, blessings without offering. But when you remove sacrifice from the equation, what you're left with is emptiness disguised as abundance. We hoard everything: money, data, attention, even validation. The result? A society that's spiritually constipated. Everyone's full of potential, but nothing's moving. The ancients would have laughed at that. They knew the danger of holding on too tightly. That's why they built their rituals around release: fire, smoke, water, all elements that transform without asking permission. A burnt offering didn't just please the gods, it cleansed the human psyche. Watching something disappear reminded them that nothing truly does. The smoke rises, the ashes remain, the energy shifts. It's the same reason we stare at campfires or ocean waves and feel calm. Deep down, our brains still recognize those movements as sacred. They mirror the invisible laws we live by, but rarely accept. Even modern science and all its shiny rationality can't escape this truth. Every act of creation consumes energy. Stars burn themselves out to make light. Your body destroys billions of cells a day just to stay alive. Death isn't the opposite of life. It's part of the choreography. But we humans, ever the narcissists, decided that shouldn't apply to us. We invented anti-aging creams and motivational quotes and called it rebellion. Imagine thinking you can outsmart entropy with a gym membership. The universe must laugh every time we buy collagen supplements. But maybe that's where our humor saves us. Because laughter, like sacrifice, is a release. It's the soul's way of exhaling tension. It says, okay, I see the absurdity of it all and I'll live anyway. That's what makes humans unique. We can know that everything ends and still throw parties, still fall in love, still make long-term plans. It's not denial, it's defiance wrapped in hope. The gods, I think, admired that about us. That's why so many ancient myths end with humans tricking, challenging, or outsmarting the divine. We were never just servants at the altar, we were co-conspirators in the drama of existence. There's a story from the Aztecs that captures this beautifully. They believed the sun only rose each morning because human hearts kept it alive. Every sacrifice wasn't an act of cruelty, but of cosmic maintenance. To us, it sounds horrifying. To them, it was collaboration. They weren't worshiping death, they were feeding dawn. And while the details are thankfully outdated, the core idea still lingers. Every time you show up when you're tired, forgive when you're hurt, or try again after failing, that's your heart feeding the sun. You keep the world running in small, unseen ways. The sacrifices just look different now. What's fascinating is how the idea of sacrifice has evolved from literal to emotional currency. We no longer offer bodies. We offer boundaries. We bleed time instead of blood. Every yes you say when you mean no is a ritual in disguise. It's not as dramatic as a temple ceremony, but it carries the same energy. The belief that giving up something will restore balance. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But the instinct behind it, the need to participate in the grand exchange of energy, never dies. It just hides under new words: compromise, effort, commitment. We've civilized the ritual, but not the hunger. And maybe that's why modern people feel so spiritually starved. We've forgotten how to honor our sacrifices. We treat them like inconveniences instead of initiations. We downplay our pain, laugh off our efforts, pretend nothing costs us, but everything does. Every choice is a trade. Every dream demands a toll. The problem isn't that we're sacrificing too much. It's that we're doing it unconsciously. The ancients had ceremonies to remind them that every loss mattered. We have calendars. And while scheduling grief is efficient, it's not exactly transformative. Still, there's hope in remembering. Because once you see sacrifice not as punishment but as participation, life starts to feel less cruel. You stop asking, why me? And start asking, what am I creating through this? That's the shift that turns suffering into art, mistakes into wisdom, endings into rebirth. It's not about worshiping pain, it's about recognizing its purpose. Even the hardest moments are exchanges, not thefts. The universe doesn't take from you to punish you. It takes from you to make space. And that's the quiet miracle hidden inside every ritual, every heartbreak, every goodbye. The moment you let go, truly let go, you don't fall into emptiness. You fall into flow. The same flow that moves rivers, galaxies, and blood through your veins. It's ancient, it's endless, and it's always waiting. The gods never stopped asking for sacrifice. They just stopped needing altars. Because now, the offering is life itself. And the only thing they ever wanted you to burn was the illusion that you were separate from it. Somewhere deep in our psychology, we still believe the universe keeps receipts. We might not light candles to forgotten gods or spill wine onto the ground, but we still live as if there's a cosmic accountant tracking every act of kindness, every broken promise, every moment we dared to hope. Maybe that's why the idea of sacrifice never really died. It just went underground. We still think, on some level, that if we pay the right price, we can buy safety from the chaos of existence. We don't burn offerings anymore. We burn ourselves out instead. The irony is that we don't even realize we're doing it. We talk about balance like it's a choice, but most of us are just modern priests in invisible temples, sacrificing sleep, joy, and peace of mind to gods with Wi-Fi connections. The altar might be your office desk, the incense your morning coffee, and the chant the relentless ping of notifications. The ritual is disguised as routine, but the essence is the same. Give something precious, receive something uncertain. And like the ancients, we call it devotion. You can laugh about it, but the parallel is almost poetic. The farmer in Mesopotamia offered his best grain to ensure rain. The worker in Manhattan offers their weekend to ensure relevance. Both are praying to forces they don't control. Both feel a strange comfort in the transaction. Because sacrifice, in its purest form, isn't about logic, it's about belonging. When you give something up for a cause, even a meaningless one, you feel part of something larger than yourself. That's why people stay in jobs that drain them or relationships that diminish them. They've mistaken endurance for purpose. It's not stupidity, it's instinct. What's fascinating is that even when societies outgrew blood rituals, they couldn't abandon the symbolism. The language of sacrifice became moral instead of material. Martyrs replaced lambs and guilt replaced fire. Religion turned the external ritual inward. Suffering became the new offering. And we, in our very human way, took it way too seriously. Somewhere along the line, we began to glorify pain itself, as if endurance was proof of virtue. The greater the suffering, the greater the sanctity. It's noble in theory, ridiculous in practice. The gods probably rolled their eyes watching us turn existence into an Olympic sport of misery. But it's not all tragic. There's a strange brilliance in our ability to find meaning in discomfort. When ancient priests sacrificed animals, they weren't celebrating death. They were acknowledging transformation. Something had to end so something else could begin. That truth still applies. The difference is, the thing that needs to end now isn't a goat, it's an illusion. The illusion of control, of certainty, of permanence. The kind of sacrifice modern people need is internal. And trust me, it hurts far more than bloodletting ever did. It's easy to kill a lamb. It's hard to kill your ego. That's what makes emotional growth feel like grief. You're letting go of versions of yourself that once kept you safe. You're saying goodbye to identities you wore like armor. It's not glamorous. It's sacred chaos. Every act of becoming demands a little funeral for who you were. And yet, we rarely give ourselves permission to mourn those small deaths. The ancients held festivals for loss. We pretend we're fine. Maybe that's why we feel so lonely. Because our pain no longer has a place to gather, no ritual to make it holy. If you think about it, even nature performs its own kind of sacrifices. The caterpillar dissolves into liquid before becoming a butterfly. Forests burn so new life can grow. Everything that thrives must first surrender its old form. The difference is, nature doesn't resist, it trusts the process. Humans, of course, complicate everything. We beg for transformation, but fight the burning. We want rebirth without the death part. It's like ordering enlightenment on Amazon Prime, free shipping, zero suffering. Yet every ancient culture knew that transformation required vulnerability. The priest had to face the fire, the initiate had to descend into the cave, the hero had to walk into the dark. These weren't punishments, they were rehearsals for reality. They taught people how to lose without despairing, how to trust without proof. In our modern world, that skill is almost extinct. We've replaced initiation rites with anxiety disorders. The descent into darkness has been outsourced to overthinking, but there's still a part of us that remembers. You can feel it when you watch a sunset or hear a song that makes your chest ache. That flicker of recognition, the quiet whisper that says, I've done this before, that's the ancient part of your brain remembering the old agreements. It knows that life always demands something back. It knows that beauty and loss are twins. And it laughs at your panic because it understands what you've forgotten. That giving something up doesn't mean it's gone. It means it's moving. Even modern physics echoes this idea. Energy doesn't disappear. It changes form. Every ending feeds a beginning. Every breath you take releases carbon dioxide that a tree will later inhale. You are constantly both giver and receiver, sacrifice and beneficiary. The ancients saw this as divine symmetry. We call it ecology. Different words, same truth. Maybe that's why rituals used to feel so grounding. They reminded people they were part of that exchange. Now we live like we're separate from it, like the rules don't apply to us. And that's when life gently reminds us, with heartbreak, with loss, with change, that the ritual never stopped. We just stopped participating consciously. And maybe that's the great cosmic joke. We spend our lives running from sacrifice, terrified of what we might lose, when in reality, it's the one thing keeping the world in balance. To give is to live. To lose is to renew. The only real tragedy is to hold on so tightly that nothing can move through you. The ancients built temples to remind themselves of that truth. We just need to look in the mirror, because every wrinkle, every scar, every sigh is proof that you've already been part of 1,000 invisible rituals. You've already paid the price. And the universe, in its silent humor, keeps the change. It's almost endearing how humans can turn even the simplest truths into cosmic riddles. Take sacrifice, for instance. Nature has been doing it effortlessly since the dawn of time. Stars explode to create planets. Forests burn so new life can rise from the ashes. Even your own body sheds skin and cells every second just to stay alive. But give that concept to humans, and suddenly it becomes a full-blown drama. We build temples, invent rituals, write tragedies, and then wonder why the universe seems so complicated. Maybe creation doesn't require as much suffering as we think. Maybe it's just that we can't resist turning life into theater. The funny thing is, every civilization thought their sacrifices were the key to balance, as if the cosmos was taking notes on who did it best. The Mayans offered blood to keep the sun moving. The Greeks burned bulls to impress Zeus. Medieval monks whipped themselves to prove devotion. And today, we sacrifice sleep to impress capitalism. We're still chasing the same feeling, that illusion of control over something too vast to understand. Because deep down, everyone wants to believe the universe is negotiable, that if we give enough, it might finally go easy on us. But the truth is, the universe doesn't bargain. It transforms. You can see that transformation everywhere once you start paying attention. Think of a volcano. It destroys everything in sight, then quietly creates new soil fertile enough to grow forests. The same pattern plays out in our lives. When something collapses, a relationship, a belief, an identity, it feels like the end of the world. But beneath that destruction, something new is already forming, quietly, stubbornly, waiting for space to grow. We call it healing, but really it's just the universe's recycling program at work. Nothing wasted, nothing truly lost. Even heartbreak in its rawest form is compost for wisdom. It just smells terrible at first. That's why every myth worth remembering hides this same lesson. Sacrifice isn't about destruction, it's about reorganization. Something gives way so that something else can realign. The Norse gods knew this when Odin hung himself on the world tree to gain knowledge. The Egyptians understood it when Osiris was dismembered, so life could renew. Even in Christianity, the cross isn't just a symbol of pain, it's a blueprint for transformation. It's the universe whispering, yes, this hurts, but it's not pointless. We've always known, in our bones, that creation and destruction aren't enemies. They're dance partners. Still, we resist. Humans have a spectacular talent for clutching what needs to go. We drag our old identities like security blankets, terrified of the void that comes with letting go. We call it nostalgia, loyalty, or tradition, but really, it's fear wearing a nice outfit. Maybe that's why ancient sacrifices were so dramatic. Blood, fire, screaming. Because humans needed to feel the loss to finally accept it. Nowadays, our sacrifices are quieter, but no less intense. Letting go of an old dream, forgiving someone who won't apologize, admitting we were wrong. Well, these are our modern altars. They're invisible, but the burn is just as real. There's something oddly humorous about how much effort we put into avoiding what the universe would have handled naturally. We'll cling to toxic relationships, dead careers, and bad habits just to delay the inevitable. It's like trying to keep a candle from melting by yelling at the flame. And when life finally takes away what we refuse to release, we call it bad luck. Maybe the gods don't punish us. Maybe they just get tired of waiting for us to surrender gracefully. But here's the twist. True sacrifice was never about loss for loss's sake. It was about alignment. The ancients didn't just give to the gods, they gave to the rhythm of existence itself. They wanted to move in harmony with the mysterious forces that spun the seasons, the tides, the stars. In their own strange way, they were scientists of the sacred, experimenting with energy exchange long before physics gave it a name. They knew that when you give something consciously, you don't lose it, you change its form. The offering burns, the smoke rises, and suddenly it's not gone. It's just elsewhere. That's a comforting thought, isn't it? that maybe nothing we give up is ever truly wasted. The love that didn't last still teaches compassion. The failure that humiliated us still builds resilience. Even regret, if held gently enough, becomes wisdom with a sense of humor. Life recycles everything. The universe, it seems, has zero tolerance for waste. You could say it's the ultimate minimalist, always turning endings into beginnings, losses into lessons, ashes into art. And perhaps that's why sacrifice, for all its blood and drama, remains such a strangely beautiful idea. It's the one act that forces us to confront both our smallness and our power. We can't control much, but we can choose what to offer. We can say, "Take this part of me. I trust you'll make it matter." That's what every prayer, every act of love, every creative spark really is. A miniature offering to the unknown. It's terrifying and liberating all at once, because in that moment you realize the fire was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to reveal what can't burn. Maybe that's the hidden wisdom our ancestors were trying to pass down through all the rituals and myths. That sacrifice is not about pleasing gods, but becoming one with the pattern of life itself. When you give willingly, you stop fighting the current and start flowing with it. You stop begging for control and start participating in creation. And perhaps that's the point of the whole cosmic play. Not to survive it, not to win it, but to learn how to offer yourself to it with grace, laughter, and maybe a touch of humility. After all, the universe doesn't need your perfection. It just needs your participation. And maybe, if you're lucky, your willingness to dance while everything burns. It's fascinating how humans are the only creatures who feel guilty for being part of nature's food chain. Every other species participates in the eternal cycle of give and take without writing poems about it. Lions don't hold therapy sessions after hunting gazelles. Trees don't apologize when they block the sunlight from smaller plants. But humans, we turned survival into philosophy. We couldn't just eat, love, and die quietly. We had to invent guilt, morality, and meaning. It's both tragic and hilarious. We were handed a universe of transformation, and instead of dancing in it, we started asking, but what does it mean? That's why sacrifice became so central to our story. It wasn't just about feeding the gods. It was about feeding our need for significance. We couldn't bear the idea that death, pain, or loss were random, so we gave them a stage and called it sacred. Every ancient ritual was humanity's way of saying, if we must suffer, let it at least make sense. And to be fair, it worked. Sacrifice gave shape to chaos. It told us that life wasn't cruel. It was cyclical, that what we lose returns in another form, even if that form is uncomfortable, like realizing the pig you ate last night might, cosmically speaking, now be part of your liver. Existence has a strange sense of humor. But the true genius of sacrifice wasn't in the act itself. It was in its symbolism. It taught us that value doesn't come from possession, but from participation, that what you hold too tightly decays, and what you give freely transforms. Every offering was a rehearsal for that lesson. The bread, the blood, the smoke, they weren't bribes to the divine. They were metaphors for trust. Because trust, at its core, is the willingness to let go without proof. It's offering your best without knowing what will come back. Maybe that's why modern life feels so spiritually dry. We've replaced trust with transaction. We want guarantees before we give, but the universe never signed a refund policy. You can see this shift everywhere. We no longer pray for rain. We buy bottled water. We don't thank the soil. We patent the seed. Somewhere along the way, we stopped participating in life's rhythm and started trying to own it. And ownership, ironically, is the opposite of belonging. The ancients lived in communion with their sacrifices. They understood they were part of the same pulse, but we've built walls between ourselves and the sacred. Now, instead of altars, we have shopping carts. Instead of rituals, we have routines. We don't make offerings to gods anymore. We make payments to algorithms. The exchange is the same, but the meaning got lost in the paperwork. And yet, beneath all our sophistication, the old instincts still whisper. Every time you feel that tug of conscience when you waste food, that spark of reverence when you see a sunset, that inexplicable urge to start over after everything falls apart, that's the ancient language of offering, trying to speak again. It's not superstition. It's memory, a memory older than civilization itself. Somewhere inside us, we still know that life is a circle of gifts, not a ladder of gains, that everything we hold too long will demand release eventually, whether through choice or circumstance. The gods don't punish, they recycle. It's easy to laugh at the rituals of the past, but at least they gave people a structure to face uncertainty. Today, we have no structure, just anxiety. The old priest burned incense, we burn out. The sacrifice used to be public, now it's internal, silent, and invisible. You can see it in people's eyes. So many walking around like half-finished offerings, always giving but never transforming. We've lost the ceremony that made surrender meaningful. We still bleed, but now we do it metaphorically and alone, in traffic or under fluorescent lights. Maybe that's the tragedy of progress. It gave us efficiency but stole our poetry. But there's hope in remembering that sacrifice doesn't have to be tragic. It can be creative, even joyful. Artists know this. Every time a painter destroys a canvas to start again, or a writer deletes a chapter that no longer fits, they're performing a sacred act. They're admitting that not everything beautiful is meant to last. The Japanese have a term for this, mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness of impermanence. It's the same wisdom hidden in ancient fire rituals, only quieter. You feel it when you watch a candle burn down, or when autumn leaves fall and you don't feel sad, just awake. It's strange how our smallest daily choices still echo those old altars. Every morning, you decide what to give your energy to, what to sacrifice, in exchange for meaning. Maybe it's time, maybe comfort, maybe pride. But what if we approach those choices with reverence instead of resentment? What if every no you say to something draining became an offering to something greater? Your peace, your purpose, your sanity. Maybe sacrifice was never meant to be about suffering at all. Maybe it was just humanity's first attempt at self-awareness. The first time we looked at our fears, wrapped them in ritual, and said, "Here, I'm ready to let go." And if you look closely enough, you'll notice that every act of love still carries that same essence. To love is to sacrifice, not out of obligation, but out of awe. You give time, patience, forgiveness, knowing you might get nothing back, but doing it anyway because something inside you insists it's worth it. That's the purest form of offering there is, giving without agenda. The ancient world called it worship. We just call it love. But they're the same thing, two names for the art of saying yes to life even when it hurts. So maybe we don't need temples or priests anymore. Maybe we just need to remember how to make every ordinary moment sacred again, to pour meaning into the smallest gestures, to see each goodbye as a ritual, each failure as a flame, each new beginning as the smoke that rises afterward. Because in the end, that's what sacrifice was always trying to show us, that nothing truly disappears. It just changes shape, waiting for us to notice that we were never losing anything at all. We were just learning how to give it properly. Somewhere along the way, sacrifice stopped being a ceremony and became a lifestyle. We started calling it ambition, hustle, self-improvement, all fancy words for please, universe, don't forget me. We laugh at ancient people offering lambs to the gods, but at least their rituals ended before dinner. Ours go on forever. We sacrifice sleep to productivity, health to vanity, peace to attention. The ancient priests had altars. We have deadlines. And what's tragic, or maybe just absurd, is that we don't even know who we're offering all this to. The gods are gone, but the hunger remains. If you think about it, that's the greatest irony of modern life. We are still worshiping something, we just stopped naming it. Some pray to success, some to approval, others to control. The rituals change shape, but the logic is identical. Give something of yourself, and maybe, just maybe, something out there will bless you in return. We've traded incense for Wi-Fi and temples for social media, but we're still kneeling, now in front of screens waiting for our little red icons of validation. It's funny, in a darkly poetic way. The ancients gave blood so the sun would rise. We give our sanity so someone will like us before noon. But there's another layer beneath that irony. All our sacrifices, ancient or modern, come from the same yearning. To connect, to belong, to feel like we matter in a world that keeps spinning without asking permission. Sacrifice was never about blood or pain. It was about participation. The villagers didn't offer their harvest because they enjoyed losing it. They did it to feel aligned with something bigger, to say, I'm part of this cycle. I give and I receive. The tragedy is that we've kept the giving but lost the receiving. We pour ourselves out constantly, but rarely pause long enough to feel full again. Maybe the gods didn't disappear. Maybe they just got tired of one-sided conversations. And yet, if you look closely, you can still see the old rhythm hiding under the noise. It's there every time someone plants a tree they'll never sit under. Every time a parent works quietly for their child's future. Every time someone forgives without an apology. That's sacrifice in its purest, most luminous form, the kind that expects nothing because it already understands everything is connected. The blood doesn't need to spill anymore. The lesson has matured. You don't need to die to prove devotion. You just need to live it consciously. It's curious how even science mirrors this ancient truth. The energy in the universe never vanishes. It only changes form. The same photons that once warmed a prehistoric ocean might now be shining through your window. The same molecules that built ancient temples might someday become your bones. You're both the sacrifice and the beneficiary, the giver and the receiver, looping endlessly through time. Maybe that's why we feel so restless when we forget to give meaning to our actions. Somewhere deep down we remember that existence itself is a sacred exchange. And maybe that's also why destruction can feel strangely sacred when it's done with awareness. To destroy something consciously, a habit, a belief, a version of yourself, is to participate in the same process that births stars. Creation needs space. Space demands endings. The ancients built bonfires to symbolize it. We meditate, we journal, we let go. Well, most of us try. Some of us just eat ice cream and call it emotional work, but hey, even that's a ritual. The flavor might not heal your wounds, but at least it reminds you that sweetness still exists. And sometimes that's enough. There's something deeply funny about how humans reinvent spirituality every century but never improve the manual. We still crave meaning, still chase transcendence, still believe that if we just do it right, life will reward us with peace. Yet, peace isn't something the universe hands out for good behavior. It's what arrives when you stop bargaining. The old sacrifices were literal, the modern ones psychological, but the real offering is always the same: presence. When you stop running from yourself long enough to simply be, the altar disappears, and what's left is participation in the miracle that was there all along. In a way, maybe sacrifice was never about appeasing higher powers, but about training humans to accept impermanence. You can't control everything, and the sooner you learn that, the less life has to pry things from your hands. It's funny, people say, I'm afraid to lose, but the truth is we're constantly losing. Every breath is a surrender, every heartbeat is a transaction. You lose time to gain memory. You lose youth to gain wisdom. You lose illusions to gain truth. It's the world's most elegant economy, and whether you like it or not, you're part of it. What the ancients called fear of the gods might just have been their way of describing awe, the trembling recognition that everything you love is temporary, yet somehow eternal in its transformation. Fear and reverence were twins. To fear was to respect the power that gives and takes life. Today, we've lost that nuance. We think fear is something to fix, to eliminate, to heal, but sometimes fear is just the body remembering that it's small in a big, wild system. Maybe that's what the old priests understood better than we do, that humility isn't submission, it's alignment. And when you think about it, the ultimate act of sacrifice isn't losing something. It's realizing you never truly owned it. Everything you cling to was only ever borrowed. Your body, your time, your memories. When you release them, willingly or not, they go back to the same mysterious source they came from. That's not tragedy, that's poetry. The ancients wrote it in ash and blood. We write it in heartbeats and pixels. Different language, same message. What you give shapes what you become. So maybe the real evolution of sacrifice isn't about ending the ritual, but refining it. Instead of offering lives to gods of thunder, we can offer awareness to the God within, the quiet intelligence that keeps the stars spinning and our hearts beating in rhythm. It doesn't want blood or gold or guilt. It just wants you awake, laughing, participating fully. Because maybe the universe doesn't need worship. It just needs witnesses. Beings willing to look at the endless exchange of death and birth, joy and sorrow, and whisper, I see it. And it's beautiful. And if you can do that, if you can give your attention, your humor, your tenderness to this wild, unfair, magnificent world, then congratulations. You've mastered the oldest ritual of them all, to love something enough to let it go and to trust that it will return, transformed, wearing a different name. Because in the end, sacrifice was never about death. It was always about remembering that life in all its chaos and comedy was never yours to keep, only yours to honor.